Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to Paranormal M. Before we get into tonight's stories, please subscribe to the channel if you enjoy this kind of content. Also, some people have told me these stories help them fall asleep, so try listening while you rest and maybe share them with someone who has trouble sleeping too. The first story tonight is about someone who wakes up at 3:17 in the morning and realizes there may be something outside their home. So lie back, relax, and I hope you sleep well. I've gone back and forth about telling this story because I know how it's going to sound. I really do. But I've been around here long enough to know that some of you might understand why I can't just brush it off anymore. I live in a little town in West Virginia called Gray Hollow. It's the kind of place where everyone knows which truck belongs to which house, and after dark, there's not much moving except wind, animals, and whatever your mind decides to invent. My place is out near the edge of town, at the very end of a dead-end road. Behind the house, there's nothing but woods. Thick woods, the kind that feel bigger at night than they do during the day. Past my driveway, there aren't any streetlights, so when it gets dark all the way. This started in late January. The first time something happened, it was January 29th, 2026, at 3:19 in the morning. I remember the time because I woke up suddenly and checked my phone, thinking maybe a message had come through. I'm a light sleeper sometimes, especially if my phone buzzes. Then I heard gravel shifting outside. At first, I told myself it was probably a deer, or maybe somebody had turned around at the end of the road, even though that almost never happens at that hour. I got up and looked through my bedroom window. There was someone standing by my mailbox. At least, I thought it was someone. It was tall. Too tall, honestly. Taller than anyone I've ever seen around here. It wasn't moving. It was just standing there, facing the house. No flashlight, no car, no engine sound. Nothing. I watched it for a few seconds, and then this feeling came over me. Not fear exactly, not at first. More like my whole body quietly telling me, stop looking. So I closed the curtain. I tried to tell myself I was half asleep. I've had my own struggles with anxiety and mental health, so I leaned on that explanation pretty hard. I wanted it to be my mind playing tricks on me. The next morning, I went outside. There had been a thin layer of snow overnight, but there were no footprints near the mailbox. None. The mailbox door was open, though. I didn't remember leaving it that way. I tried to forget about it. I really did. I told myself it was nothing, because sometimes nothing is the only answer that lets you get through the day. Then it happened again on February 3rd. Same time, 3:19 a.m. This time, I woke up already knowing something was wrong. I hadn't heard anything yet. I just felt it. I checked my phone, and when I saw the time, my stomach dropped. I made myself look out the window. It was closer. Not by the mailbox anymore. It was halfway up the driveway. Still tall, still completely still, but there was something wrong with the shape of it. I don't know how else to explain that. It looked too thin, too straight, like the proportions didn't belong to a person. I whispered, "What are you?" And right after I said that, it tilted its head. Slowly. Way too far to one side. I stepped back from the window and didn't look again for the rest of the night. After that, I started waking up around that time on purpose. Or maybe my body started doing it for me. Most nights, nothing happened, and I almost convinced myself again that it was stress, lack of sleep, my brain making shadows into monsters. Then February 12th happened. I woke up to tapping. At first, I thought it was my bedroom window. There are branches close to that side of the house, and it had been windy, so that made sense. But the sound wasn't coming from upstairs. It was coming from the living room. I checked my phone. 3:19 a.m. I still don't know why I went downstairs. I wish I hadn't, but something in me needed to know. The tapping stopped the second I reached the bottom step. The whole house went quiet. I stood there listening, barely breathing. Then I looked toward the front door. There's a little window near the top of it, and something outside was blocking the glass. Something was standing right up against the door. I walked closer. Slowly. I got maybe 5 feet away. Then it moved. Not backward. Not away from the house. It slid sideways past the window. I only saw part of it, but that was enough. It looked too tall to fit in the frame, like the window was only showing me a slice of something much bigger. I didn't open the door. There was no chance I was opening that door. I went back upstairs, locked myself in my room, and stayed there until morning. A few days later, on February 16th, I set up an old security camera I had in the garage. I pointed it at the driveway. Nothing special, just motion detection. The next morning, I checked the footage. At 3:19 a.m., the camera triggered. But there was nothing there. No person, no animal, just the empty driveway. Except the audio picked something up. Footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps on gravel, coming toward the camera. Then they stopped right in front of it. After that, there was this breathing sound. I don't even know if breathing is the right word. It was too steady, too hollow, like air moving through something that wasn't built for it. Then the video cut out for a few seconds. When it came back, everything looked normal again. I haven't seen it since that night. No tapping, no figure in the driveway, no mailbox left open. But I still wake up around 3:19 sometimes. And every time I do, I get this awful feeling that if I look outside again, it'll be closer than before. I don't know what it was, but I'm starting to think it noticed me noticing it. I've had 3 experiences like this, but I'm only going to talk about 2 of them here. The first time, I was about 13. I lived way out in the country, on a farm where everything felt far away from everything else. My home life wasn't easy, and that's how I ended up outside in the middle of winter, around midnight, searching for a missing socket wrench. I wasn't allowed back inside until I found it. By then, my stepdad had turned off the porch lights and most of the lights in the house, so I was out there in the dark. I remember walking along the pale gravel driveway, trying to stay on it because even in the cold, farm life has a way of hiding things that can bite or sting you. I was looking down at the gravel when I noticed it seemed to have this faint glow. Not bright exactly, but lit enough that I could see the path stretching way out past the pasture. Then I looked up. The moon looked huge, and the longer I stared at it, the bigger it seemed to get. Bigger and bigger, until it felt like it was taking up too much of the sky. I had on a puffy winter coat, but honestly, I was still underdressed for how cold it was. At first, I remember feeling the chill. Then, after a while, I didn't feel cold anymore. I didn't feel much of anything. I just went still, numb, quiet. I stood there staring at the moon, and to me, it felt like maybe 20 minutes had passed. Eventually, I sort of snapped out of it, lost focus, and decided to sneak back into the house. The kitchen clock was one of the only things glowing inside. When I checked it, I realized I had been outside for over 3 hours. The next time something like this happened, I was 22 and on a cruise. It was December, so the weather wasn't great, but that was part of why the trip was cheap. A big storm rolled in, and the crew started making announcements that they were going to close the outside decks. I'd had one drink with dinner, so I might have been a little tipsy, but nothing more than that. For some reason, I got this idea that I wanted to go outside and see the storm before they shut everything down. I found a door that was still unlocked and ended up in this outdoor walkway area. I'm pretty sure I wasn't supposed to be there. It looked like one of those access areas that led to other parts of the ship, but I was able to get close to the front, which was what I wanted. I was still high above the water, and I could see a smaller deck below me near the bow. The wind was wild. The ship was rocking and jerking, and the rain was coming in sideways, but it wasn't pouring yet. I remember looking out into the dark ocean, and then my eyes lifted to the moon. That same feeling came over me. It was almost euphoric, but not in a normal way. It was peaceful and overwhelming at the same time. Everything around me started to fade. The lights from the ship, the noise, the storm, even the feeling of where I was standing. And I should say, I was wearing heels and a formal dress because I had just come from dinner. I should have been freezing. I should have been uncomfortable. But I wasn't. I just stood there in the storm, staring up, feeling like the whole world had gone quiet except for the moon. Eventually, one of my friends found me. I remember feeling disappointed when he did, almost like I had been pulled away from something. He was upset because, apparently, I had been missing for at least 30 minutes, maybe longer. That was just how long they knew of. And then I noticed the rain. It was suddenly pouring, not misting, not light rain, but a full downpour. To me, it felt like it had changed in just a few seconds. I've had that feeling one other time, but I still don't really know what happened or what it was. I don't know if it was something psychological, something spiritual, or just my mind reacting to stress and the moon in a strange way. I'm not trying to make it sound bigger than it is. I'm just looking for advice or guidance because I've never been able to fully explain it. Hey everyone, I wanted to share something that happened to me a few years ago because I still think about it, and honestly, I'd really like to know if anyone else has ever experienced anything even close to this. Before anyone says it was sleep paralysis, I completely understand why that would be the first thought. I've wondered that too, but the part that still makes me question it is that someone else in the room heard part of it as well. This happened back in 2019, when I was at my boyfriend's house. I'll call him Evan. His mom was at work, so it was just the two of us there. I had decided to take a nap, and I've never been the kind of person who sleeps through everything. I usually wake up pretty easily. At some point, I suddenly heard his porch screen door swing open really hard. It was loud, not just a little creak or a breeze catching it, but the kind of sound that makes your whole body tense up before your brain even catches up. It woke me up, but I couldn't open my eyes. I couldn't move either. I was lying on my side, facing the wall, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't turn over or say anything. His mom would never come in like that, so immediately I felt this wave of panic. I remember thinking, who just came inside? Then I heard the front door open just as hard. Right after that, a deep male voice called out, "Hello?" It sounded like someone checking to see if anyone was home. Evan didn't react at all. He was still asleep beside me. Meanwhile, I was trapped in my own body, trying so hard to move, trying to force my eyes open, trying to make any sound at all. Then I heard footsteps. More than one set, from what I could tell. They moved quickly through the house, coming straight toward the bedroom. The bedroom door opened, and at that point, I truly thought we were being robbed. I was terrified, but I still couldn't do anything. Then something even stranger happened. Out of nowhere, I heard this intense drilling sound right next to my ear. It was loud and sharp, and my whole body felt like it was vibrating with it. It happened once, and I remember thinking, what is happening to me? Then it happened again. By that point, I started panicking in a different way. I thought, is this permanent? Am I going to be stuck like this? Then it happened a third time, and I genuinely had this horrible feeling that this was just going to be my life now. Frozen, aware, unable to speak, with that sound tearing through me. And then, just as suddenly, I heard the footsteps leaving. Everything went quiet. The moment it stopped, I could move again. I sat up immediately, completely shaken. Evan woke up too and asked me what was wrong. I told him everything, and he just stared at me for a second. His face changed, like he was trying to decide whether to say something or not. Then he told me that he thought he had heard the door open too. He also thought he heard a man say, "Hello?" But he said he had been half asleep and just drifted back off. He didn't experience the rest of what happened to me. Not the footsteps coming to the room, not the drilling sound, not the vibrating. But both of us heard someone come in and say hello. That's the part I can't really explain. I know sleep paralysis can feel incredibly real. I know it can come with sounds, fear, and the feeling that someone is in the room. But how did he hear part of it too? So I'm wondering if anyone has had anything similar happen, especially something where another person heard part of the same thing. I don't know if this was sleep paralysis, something paranormal, something stranger, or maybe something I don't even have a name for. And just to be clear, I wasn't under the influence of anything. I wasn't using drugs. I didn't have any mental health issues. And at that point in my life, I hadn't tried anything like that at all. I've also never experienced anything remotely similar since. I still don't know what happened, but I'd really love to hear what other people think. I was 6 years old when this happened. My family had just moved from the Philippines to a small place tucked away in the Appalachian Mountains. For the first few weeks, everything felt peaceful. Strange, yes, because it was so different from home, but peaceful. My parents had read about the area before we moved there. They knew people had stories about the mountains, and they took the local warnings seriously. Keep the doors locked. Cover the windows at night. Do not go outside after dark unless you absolutely have to. Things like that. So we were careful. But one night, while we were having dinner, we made one mistake. The curtains were still open. I remember sitting at the table, eating quietly, when something outside caught my eye. At first, I thought it was just a pale tree trunk in the darkness. But then I looked closer. There was a figure standing only a few steps from our house. It was tall, thin, and completely white. Its mouth was hanging open so wide it looked unnatural. And the worst part was that it seemed to be looking straight at me. Not at the house. At me. I tried to tell my parents. I pointed at the window and said there was something outside, but they barely looked. They told me I was probably tired, or that I had seen a branch moving in the dark. But when I looked back, the figure was gone. Just gone. Like it had never been there at all. Later that night, my father locked the doors, checked the windows, and pulled thick, dark curtains over every piece of glass in the house. My mother and I went upstairs. She was folding clothes near the closet while I lay in bed, still thinking about what I had seen. Then I noticed something that made my stomach turn cold. There was a cross hanging on the wall near the closet, and it was upside down. I told my mother. She looked at it, and the moment she saw it, her face changed. She called for my father right away, but he did not answer. That was not like him. My father was not the kind of person to ignore us, especially at night in a place like that. After a few minutes, my mother went downstairs to check on him, and I was left alone in the room. I remember lying there, too scared to move, praying silently that nothing would happen to my parents. I was only 6, but I understood enough to know that something was wrong. Then I heard it. The window across from my bed started banging, not tapping, banging. The window was already shut tight, and the curtains were covering it, but something outside was hitting it again and again, like it was trying to force its way in. I screamed for my mother. She rushed back into the room just as the glass began to crack. She grabbed me and pulled me under the bed. My father came in right after her and hid beneath the heavy wooden table beside us. Then the window broke. I will never forget that sound. Glass fell across the floor, and then we heard footsteps inside the room. Slow footsteps. Careful footsteps. Like whatever had come in was searching for us. My mother held me so tightly I could barely breathe. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. We stayed hidden while that thing walked around the room above us. I could not see it, but I could feel it there. After what felt like forever, the footsteps stopped. Then we heard it leave. Even after it was gone, none of us moved right away. My father waited and listened for a long time, just to make sure it was not trying to trick us. When he finally said it was safe, he got up, grabbed a thick wooden plank, and blocked the broken window as best as he could. My mother was shaking. I was crying. My father tried to stay calm, but I could tell he was scared too. That night, my mother told me to try to sleep, but she and my father stayed awake guarding the house until morning. The next day, my mother made breakfast like she was trying to pretend things were normal. My father sat nearby doing research, trying to find more information about the mountains and what we might have seen. I barely spoke. Every time I looked at the window beside me, I saw that white figure in my mind again. We stayed there for 3 more months, but the feeling in that house never went away. Sometimes I thought I saw something pale moving between the trees. Sometimes I felt watched, even in the daytime. Eventually, my father decided we were going back to the Philippines. We had saved enough money, and after what happened, none of us wanted to stay. We never went back to that place. Even now, years later, I still think about that night. I do not have nightmares as often anymore, but when I do, it is always the same thing. That white figure outside the window, its mouth open, its eyes on me. So if anyone listening lives in the Appalachian Mountains, please be careful. Stay alert, and please, if your child tells you they saw something, especially if they look truly scared, listen to them. Sometimes children notice things adults try too hard to explain away. It was somewhere around 2 in the morning when 5 of us drove into Erie Colony. And you know, Erie feels like a completely different place at that hour. During the day, it is still part of the city somehow, but at night, it feels cut off from everything. The roads are quiet, the trees feel heavier, and there is this strange silence that makes even a small sound feel a little too loud. We eventually stopped near the gate of a building called Royal Imperial Heights. The car headlights were on, so the whole gate area was lit up pretty clearly. We were not hidden in darkness or guessing shapes from far away. Everything was right there in front of us, and that is when I saw him. There was a security guard standing just behind the gate. He was wearing a dark blue uniform. He was not in a corner, not half covered by a shadow, not far away. He was just standing there, facing our car. There were 2 dogs near him too. I remember pointing him out right away and saying something like, "Look, the guard is standing there." But everyone else in the car looked at me like I had said something strange. All 4 of them said, "What guard?" I thought they were joking at first, but they were serious. They could see the dogs. That part was clear to everyone. But they said there was no man in blue standing behind the gate. Instead, they kept telling me there was another guard, wearing a brown uniform, sitting inside a small cabin near the side. But I could not see anyone in that cabin at all. For me, the only guard there was the one in blue, right behind the gate, right in front of us. And for the next couple of minutes, we kept arguing. 5 people, sitting in the same car, looking at the same gate, with the same headlights shining on it. But somehow, we were not seeing the same thing. That is when the whole situation started feeling wrong. Not because area is quiet at night, not because the place looked spooky, but because I was seeing something so clearly and nobody else could see it. So I drove away. We went maybe a kilometer ahead before stopping again, but the argument did not stop. Everyone was still trying to explain what they had seen, and I was still saying, "No, I'm telling you, there was a guard standing right there." After a while, they convinced me to turn back and check once more. So we went back. Same road, same gate, same place. I stopped the car again, and we all waited. And then, after a few seconds, the same guard in the blue uniform came and stood behind the gate. This time, everyone saw him. All 5 of us. He was just standing there casually, using his phone. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic. Completely normal, completely real. But he was in the exact same spot where I had seen him earlier. And that is the part I still cannot fully explain. Maybe I noticed him before everyone else did. Maybe their attention was somewhere else. Maybe it was just one of those weird moments where the mind plays tricks. Or maybe, for those first 2 minutes, I saw something that the others simply could not see yet. I live in France, in an old stone house that's been completely restored now, though it definitely didn't always look the way it does today. The woman who owns it is in her early 70s, and this was actually her childhood home. She grew up here with her parents and her grandparents. After they passed away, she left the place empty for more than 2 decades. From what I've been told, it slowly fell apart during that time. Then, years later, she came back and decided to bring it back to life. And that's the house I live in now. To be honest, we've never had anything here that I would seriously call paranormal. Some corners of the house have that old house feeling, you know? The kind where the air feels a little heavier than it should. But nothing frightening has ever really happened. There was one former neighbor, though, who used to sneak inside back when the place was abandoned. His name was Mark, or at least that's what everyone called him. He said he heard footsteps, whispers, even voices inside the house. Sometimes he claimed he ran out terrified. I'll be honest, I never fully trusted his stories. We had a lot of trouble with him later on, and I think he was dealing with some serious personal issues. So I always took what he said with a mountain of salt. But then something happened that I still can't explain. One evening, I was upstairs in my bedroom. My room is right above the main hallway downstairs. Next to that hallway is the living room, where my parents usually sit in the evening to watch TV. If I drop something or walk too heavily in my room, they can hear it pretty clearly from down there. That night, everything was quiet. Then suddenly, I heard 3 loud knocks come from the floor beneath me. Not soft taps, not creaks. 3 heavy, identical bangs. Boom. 1 second. Boom. 1 second. Boom. I felt the floor tremble under my feet each time. At first, I thought maybe something had fallen downstairs, or maybe someone had bumped into a wall. It startled me, but I didn't think too much of it. Then, a few moments later, my parents messaged me from the living room. They asked, "What was that noise?" They said it sounded like it had come from the ceiling above them, which would mean it came from my bedroom floor. The sound had echoed through the whole house. That's when it stopped feeling ordinary, because from my side, it sounded like someone had been underneath me, knocking hard on the ceiling below. But from their side, it sounded like the noise came from where I was standing. I checked around my room. Nothing had fallen. Nothing was out of place. Nobody else was upstairs. I even asked a neighbor afterward if they had heard anything, but they hadn't heard a thing. The sound had come from inside the house, from the floor, from right under my feet. And to this day, I still don't know what made those 3 knocks. Most of my life, I've carried this around quietly. I've never really known how to explain it, and I've never met anyone who said, "Yes, I know exactly what you mean." But when I was little, I used to have these recurring dreams that didn't feel like dreams at all. They felt more like I was being taken somewhere. Every time, I was inside this enormous old manor, or maybe it was a castle. It was hard to tell because everything was so huge and dark, like the whole place had been built for people twice our size. The ceilings went up forever. The furniture felt oversized. The hallways stretched on in a way that made you feel small before anything frightening even happened. And there were children everywhere. Not just a few, hundreds, maybe more. I remember them hiding in the same rooms as me, crouched under beds, pressed behind heavy curtains, tucked behind wardrobes and chairs. There were no adults anywhere, not one. We were all hiding from something. I never saw what it was. I don't think I ever had the courage to look. But every child there knew it was moving through the building. We could feel it coming before we heard it. And then, from somewhere down the hall or behind another door, the screaming would start. That was how we knew it had entered a nearby room. The second that happened, everyone scattered. Nobody had to explain the rules. Nobody had to tell us what to do. We all understood the same thing in that wordless, awful way children sometimes understand danger. Don't let it find you. The room I remember most was like a giant bedroom. It was dim and heavy feeling, full of shadows and old furniture. I can still picture kids crawling beneath the bed frame, hiding behind the drapes, holding their breath. It felt less like a dream scene and more like a place I had returned to again and again. Eventually, I would always run. I'd burst out into a huge spiral staircase with a deep red runner on the steps. It curled downward around this enormous empty space in the center. And somehow, instead of using the stairs, I would throw myself into that open drop. I remember falling through the middle of it, not exactly dying, not exactly waking up, just escaping. There's another part I've never forgotten. Sometimes hidden doors would appear in the walls, almost like the house was changing its mind. Once, I opened one and found a narrow staircase behind it, filled with smoke or pale mist. I climbed it, and near the top I came to a door with a keyhole. When I looked through, I saw the brightest light I've ever seen. It wasn't like sunlight. It wasn't like a lamp. It was something far beyond that, so bright it felt almost alive. I don't know how else to describe it. But the part that stayed with me most wasn't the castle, or the thing hunting us, or even the light. It was the other children. They didn't feel like dream people. They felt real, like actual children, like they had their own fear, their own thoughts, their own memories of that place. I'm not saying this was supernatural. I'm not trying to prove anything. I just want to know whether anyone else remembers something even close to this. A massive dark place, only children, everyone hiding, something moving through the rooms, that shared, silent terror, and some kind of escape through falling, descending, or finding a hidden passage. If any of this sounds familiar to you, even a little, I'd honestly love to hear about it. People usually don't know what to do with this story when I tell it. Some smile politely, some think I'm joking, some assume I must have dreamed it, or imagined it later. or stitched it together from things I learned as a child. But for me, it has never felt like that. This is one of my earliest memories. Actually, it feels earlier than early. It feels like the first thing I ever knew. Before I remember having a body, before I remember a crib or a room or a voice calling my name, I remember being aware. There were no hands, no feet, no weight. I wasn't breathing, but I didn't need to. I was just there, conscious, calm, quiet. I don't know if I was floating. That's the closest word I have, but even that doesn't feel quite right. It was more like existing in a wide, open stillness. Not empty, not lonely, just peaceful, like everything was waiting with purpose. And then there was a voice. I couldn't see anyone. I didn't see a face or a figure. I only remember light, and I somehow knew the voice was beside me, even though there was no one there in the way we usually understand someone being there. The voice asked me which planet I wanted to live on. I know how strange that sounds. I know. But in that moment, I understood the question completely. I was shown several places, not in a slow, ordinary way, but all at once, as if a huge amount of meaning could fit inside a single, breathless instant. And then I saw it. A round, blue world, far away. Earth. It was so blue, deep, bright, alive. It looked beautiful to me in a way I still don't know how to explain. I felt drawn to it immediately, like something in me leaned toward it before I even decided. So I chose Earth. After that, the voice asked me about the life I wanted to go through. Not exactly in spoken words. It was more like the meaning entered me directly, and I understood that I had to choose an experience, a path. Then I became aware of so many possibilities, glimpses, wishes, lives, situations. They passed through my awareness like little windows opening and closing. One of them stood out. There was a family hoping for a baby girl. I couldn't see them clearly, but I could feel them. Their longing was warm and sincere. They felt gentle, safe, kind, and I especially remember the father's wish. It was so strong and tender, this quiet hope for a daughter. That was the family I chose. And once I chose them, everything began to change. I remember movement. Not falling exactly, more like being pulled downward, slowly, gently, toward that blue world. I felt myself becoming heavier somehow, more focused, smaller. My awareness narrowed, like I was entering a tiny room after being part of something wide and endless. Then the next memory begins. I was a baby. I was lying down, staring at a ceiling. That is one of the funniest parts to me now, because I remember being aware, but not able to do anything. I couldn't sit. I couldn't stand. I couldn't speak. I couldn't think in proper words yet. I was just there, looking up at the ceiling, wondering in my own baby way why I was doing nothing but staring. I remember moving my hands and feet, kicking a little, feeling motion, feeling trapped and fascinated at the same time, because suddenly I had a body, and the body was mine, but I had no idea how to use it yet. And then there was the moment I touched something. That memory is incredibly strong. I remember realizing I could feel matter, texture, pressure, resistance, solidness. It amazed me. It was like discovering, through my own tiny hands, what real meant. Something could push back. Something could have shape. Something could be touched. Everything felt new, sharp, physical, so intensely real. I'm I'm not sharing this because I want to convince anyone of a belief. I'm not trying to prove anything. I know there are people who will say memory is strange, that the mind can create things, that children absorb ideas without realizing it. Maybe. But I had these memories before I knew Earth was round, before I knew it was mostly covered in water, before I learned about God, angels, spirits, souls, or anything like that, before I understood what wishing meant, before I even really understood what a family was. I didn't grow up surrounded by mystical stories either. I started watching television when I was around 6, and most of what I watched was the news with my dad. I mostly remember him getting angry at the screen and cursing about corrupt politicians. So, not exactly a magical childhood curriculum. But because of these memories, when I learned about God at church around the age of 7, something in me responded deeply. It felt less like being introduced to an idea and more like hearing a name for something I had already brushed against. Still, I don't claim to know what it all means. Maybe it was real. Maybe it was imagination. Maybe it was something the mind made, or something the soul carried, or something I won't understand until much later. I'm honestly okay with not knowing. I just know that I have remembered it for as long as I have remembered being alive. And because of it, no matter what life throws at me, some quiet part of me feels like I agreed to be here, like I chose this planet, this family, this strange, difficult, beautiful life. And someday, in the very, very distant future, when my time here is done, maybe I'll meet that voice again. If I do, I think I'll tell them everything. I'll say, Earth was intense. Humans were complicated. The food was great. The heartbreak was unnecessary, but memorable. Overall, I'd give it an 8 out of 10. And then I'd probably add, highly recommended for workaholics, greedy people, and anyone who needs a very dramatic course in humility. Before I get into this, I want to explain something about myself. I collect antiques. I've been doing it for a little over 6 years now, so I'm not exactly new to the feeling that certain objects can carry something with them. I know that might sound strange to some people, but when you spend enough time around old things, you start to notice that not everything is just wood, porcelain, fabric, or dust. Some pieces feel quiet. Some feel warm. Some feel heavy. And then there's this doll. I call her Maribel. She's a German bisque doll, probably from around the late 1930s or early 1940s, at least from what I can tell. I found her at an antique mall I visit pretty often. I brought her home on June 28, 2025. Usually, when I'm antiquing and something catches my eye, I don't buy it right away. I'll carry it around the store for a while and sort of sit with its energy. If it feels wrong or unsettled, I quietly tell it I'm going to leave it behind, and then I put it back. With Maribel, I did the same thing. And at the time, I didn't feel anything alarming. No shift in the air, no pressure, no sudden urge to put her down. Honestly, I thought she was beautiful. I've been wanting to add more dolls to my collection because I only had a few, and she felt like exactly the kind of piece I'd been hoping to find. So I bought her, brought her home, and placed her on one of my shelves. I've always been sensitive to spirit presence. That's been part of my life since I was little. As I've gotten older, I've become more comfortable allowing that kind of energy in my space, as long as there's respect on both sides. I treat my antiques carefully, almost like they're guests in my home. To me, old objects have stories. Maybe not always spirits, but definitely stories. About a week after I brought Maribel home, I started dealing with intense dizziness and this awful mental fog. It felt like vertigo mixed with deep brain fatigue. I am getting medical help for it, So I want to be clear that I'm not asking anyone to diagnose me or anything like that. But part of me keeps wondering if the timing means something. Earlier today, I sat down with Maribel and used dowsing rods. I kept the questions simple. She didn't answer everything, but she did respond to a few. I asked, "Are you making me anxious right now?" The answer was yes. Then I asked, "Are you doing it on purpose?" No answer. I asked, "Is my energy clashing with yours?" She said no. Then I asked, "Is your energy clashing with my mother's?" She said yes. And the reason I asked that is because my mother has never liked this doll. She's also spiritually sensitive, and she told me recently that a photo memory popped up on her phone from the day I bought Maribel. It was a picture of me holding the doll, and she said the moment she saw it again, something in her told her there was something wrong with it. She said that since the day I brought Maribel home. I tried not to take it too seriously at first because I know everyone feels antiques differently. Something that feels perfectly fine to me might make someone else uneasy. But my mother is usually right when she says something feels off. Not always, but often enough that I pay attention. After the dowsing session, I asked Maribel if she would be all right with me moving her into another room for the night, just to see whether the energy in my bedroom changed. I cleansed my room, and after getting what felt like permission, I moved her out to the back storage room and cleansed her too. And honestly, the difference was immediate. My room felt lighter, calmer, less crowded somehow. I'm used to spirits making noise or trying to get my attention. That doesn't scare me. But every time something feels strange in my room, my eyes go straight to Maribel. Not because I think she looks creepy, and not because I'm afraid of dolls. It's more automatic than that. Like some part of me notices her before I even understand why. That's what bothers me. I don't know whether I should give her to someone else or trust what she seems to be telling me, that she isn't here to cause harm. I don't really believe in coincidences, and I can't ignore the fact that I brought her home only about a week before the vertigo and fatigue started. I also don't want to be disrespectful. I brought her home knowing there was always a chance she could have something attached to her. I don't want to just toss her away like she's garbage. That feels wrong to me. She has also indicated that she wouldn't be upset if I gave her away, but I still feel conflicted. So I guess I'm asking this gently. Has anyone dealt with something like this before? How do you know when an object is just carrying heavy energy, and when it's something you truly need to remove from your space? Because I don't hate Maribel. I don't even want to get rid of her. I just want to understand what she brought with her. I've had a few strange things happen in this house, and honestly, something happened just now that made me want to finally talk about it. I'll say this first. I don't fully believe in ghosts. Not completely. I'm not the kind of person who jumps straight to haunted every time a floorboard creaks. But there are things that have happened here that I still can't explain, no matter how many normal excuses I try to give them. So I'll start with the smaller things and work up to the one that really scared me. Sometimes I'll smell someone nearby, almost like a person has just walked past me. But when I go looking, there's nobody there. That one isn't too scary, I know, but it's still weird when you're home and suddenly it feels like someone else is standing close. Other times I'll hear footsteps moving through the house, or I'll hear a door shut somewhere. And when I check, everything is empty. I usually just tell myself it's the house settling or being dramatic. That helps a little. I've also had moments where I think I see a face or a shadow out of the corner of my eye, Then I turn around and of course, nothing is there. One of the creepier things is the singing outside my window at night. It sounds like a woman humming, or maybe mumbling some kind of song I don't recognize. It's soft, but close enough to make me get up and look. I live out in the country, though I do have neighbors, so every time it happens I check because my first thought is, please let this just be some random person and not someone trying to break in. But every time, there's nobody outside. There's also knocking at the back door sometimes. It happens during the day and at night, but not very often. Still, when you open the door and nobody is there, it leaves this cold little feeling in your chest. Then there was what happened just a moment ago, which is what made me want to share all of this. My boyfriend Eli told me he felt like he was being watched in the kitchen. I was in my game room, so I kind of brushed it off and told him he was probably fine. Then he started walking back toward his room, and I watched him because I was hoping I could make a creepy face and scare him. But while he was walking away, I saw the shadow of a person appear on the hallway wall near my room. It moved by itself, like an actual human shadow walking, and then it disappeared right at my doorway. That one got me. Another thing that really bothers both of us is the doors. We've watched doors open by themselves. In our bedroom, we've seen the door handle move on its own. We actually have to lock the bedroom door, because if we don't, it'll open and shut during the night. The closet door in that room is even worse because it doesn't lock. We have to put a big, heavy storage bin in front of it. Most of the time that works, but every now and then, the bin will be shifted, and the closet door will just swing open. The bin moving is rare, but when it happens, it feels very deliberate. And then there's the scariest thing that has happened to me so far. One night, my friend Mira was staying over. We decided to go to bed, so I went into the bedroom and got under the covers, and she settled in the living room. Eli was in the kitchen making himself a snack. I turned the lights off and lay there waiting for him to come to bed. Then I heard the bedroom door handle move. I thought it was Eli, so I pretended to be asleep, hoping I could scare him when he came in. But the door never opened. I kept waiting. Then I heard something scurrying around on the floor near the bed. Before I could really react, I felt a hand slide under the blanket at the foot of the bed and grab my foot, like it was trying to tickle me. I kicked hard. I felt the weight of an arm drop off the bed, and I heard a small thud hit the floor. And immediately, I felt this awful sense of dread. I called out for Eli, thinking maybe I had kicked him by accident. But when I looked over the foot of the bed, nobody was there. I got up and walked out of the bedroom, and Eli was sitting in the kitchen eating a bowl of cereal. He looked completely confused when I asked him how he had done it. He told me he had never left the kitchen. Mira said the same thing. She had seen him there the whole time. So then I asked, then who just grabbed my foot? Neither of them had an answer. After that, Mira and I tried doing a little ghost hunting around the house. We didn't really find much, except for high EMF readings in the bedroom. Thankfully, nothing has grabbed me since then. But those are the strange things that have happened in this house so far. And honestly, I'm still trying to convince myself there's some normal explanation for all of it. I know this is going to sound strange, and honestly, I'm still not sure what to make of it. I've never had anything like this happen before, so I'm really just trying to get some outside perspective. It started about 3 nights ago, and since then, it's been happening pretty consistently. Or maybe I'm just noticing it more now because I'm paying attention. For context, I'm a musician. I live with my 2 older brothers and my sister-in-law, and all of them play music too. So our house is full of instruments, guitars, a keyboard, amps, cases, all of that. We keep most of it in one spare room. We also have a house rule: no playing instruments inside after midnight. If somebody gets the urge to play that late, they either wait until morning or go outside. It's just something we agreed on because, well, nobody wants to be jolted awake by a guitar solo at 1 in the morning. The first time it happened, I was home by myself. I was sitting in the living room watching TV when I heard a guitar coming from the instrument room. And I don't mean one string randomly vibrating or something falling over. I mean someone was playing it. It was this steady little rhythm, almost like a simple melody. Not amazing, not anything complicated, but it had structure. It sounded intentional. I remember sitting there for a second, just frozen, trying to convince myself I was hearing something from the TV. But I muted it, and the guitar was still going. So I got up and went to the room. Nobody was there. Just the instruments, sitting exactly where they always are. I checked behind the door. I even checked the closet, which felt ridiculous while I was doing it, but I needed some kind of explanation. There was nothing. No one. The second time happened the next day after I got out of the shower. The bathroom is right across the hall from that same room. I had just opened the door and stepped out when I heard it again. Same kind of guitar strumming, same rhythm or close to it. This time I wasn't alone in the house, but I was the only one upstairs, and I know that because I called out, and everyone answered from downstairs. Then today, it happened again, only this time it wasn't the guitar. It was my keyboard. Again, it wasn't like some polished performance. It sounded simple, almost hesitant, but there was definitely a tune there. A few notes, a pause, then a few more, like someone was trying to figure out a melody by ear. And the last time I heard it, there was something else too. A voice. It sounded high-pitched, almost feminine. I couldn't make out the words at all. It was too soft or maybe too muffled. But I know I heard someone speaking. That's the part that's really been bothering me. I keep trying to come up with normal explanations. Maybe the house is making noises. Maybe something electronic is glitching. Maybe one of the instruments is somehow picking up interference. I don't know, but the sounds don't feel random. They feel played. And that's what I can't get past. So yeah, I know this sounds odd. I know how it probably comes across. But I'm honestly just looking for thoughts, theories, anything that might help me make sense of it. I'm not completely sure how to say this without sounding dramatic, but for a long time, I've had this feeling that something is attached to my family. Not just me, my family. We've always believed in the paranormal, or at least we've been open to it. It was never something we laughed off completely. And I guess to understand why this has stayed with me, you'd need to know a little about how I grew up. I'm the youngest of 4 siblings, though they're all half-siblings. I'm the only child my mom and dad had together. When I was little, strange things were just part of life. Not every single day, but often enough that it didn't feel random. I remember being around 5 years old and seeing these dark figures. Not quick little shadows out of the corner of my eye either. These would stay long enough for me to stare at them and know I was seeing something. I had a really hard time sleeping back then too. I slept in my parents' bed until I was almost done with elementary school because being alone at night felt impossible. At first, I told my sisters what I was seeing. They acted like they didn't believe me, probably because they didn't want to scare me more than I already was. Years later, though, they admitted they had believed me the whole time, and they had their own experiences. My sisters dealt with things that felt almost cruel. Sleep paralysis, red-eyed figures, shadows in rooms, that awful feeling of being singled out by something you can't explain. One time, we were all at my aunt's house, just sitting on the couch, when a decoration suddenly fell from a shelf and hit one of my sisters right on the head. The shelf was secure. It was nailed in properly. The decoration wasn't round, and there was no reason for it to slide off. Things like that happened more than once. We also had drawers opening on their own, though I'll admit that might have just been because the old dresser we kept passing between us was uneven. I try to be fair about it. I don't want to blame every little thing on ghosts. But then there are the things I can't explain. For me, dreams have always been strange. A lot of the time, I don't dream at all. But when I do, they can be incredibly vivid, almost like little flashes of places I've never been. Then weeks or months later, I'll find myself standing in that exact place with that same feeling in my stomach. Other nights, I wake up from a completely dreamless sleep in a cold sweat, confused and panicked. When that happens, I sometimes see things in the dark. Shadows mostly. But the strangest one is always the same. Wasps. I'll be lying there, absolutely convinced there are wasps flying around my room. Always wasps. Never bees. Never flies. Just wasps. I've also always had strong gut feelings. I know that sounds vague, but I'll get this heavy, awful feeling before something bad happens. Not every time, but enough that I notice it. More recently, there was one day during summer break when I was home alone. I woke up, went through my normal morning routine, brushed my hair, cleaned my glasses, used the bathroom, and then went downstairs to sit on the couch. A few seconds later, I heard the toilet flush upstairs. At first, I told myself I was just imagining it because I had just been in the bathroom. But then I heard the water running through the pipes afterward. That sound was real. I stayed downstairs the entire day and refused to go back up until my parents got home. There are also stories from when I was a toddler. Apparently, I was sitting in my car seat near the bottom of the stairs while my family was getting ready to go somewhere. Suddenly, I started waving and pointing toward the top of the stairs, repeating, "Grandpa." But my grandfather had already passed away. And that wasn't the only time something like that happened when I was small. I also remember my mom showing me pictures from when she was younger, and in some of them, she and her friends were using a Ouija board. I don't know whether that matters. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But I've never forgotten it. The part that bothers me most is the feeling. It's this constant sense that I'm being followed or watched, or that I'm not fully safe in my own home. It gets worse when I'm alone, especially in my parents' room. There's something about that space that makes my whole body tense. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe there's some logical explanation for all of it. But sometimes I wonder if this is a curse, or if I'm losing my mind, or if my family just has some kind of strong spiritual connection we don't understand. I really don't know. All I know is that the feeling has been with me for as long as I can remember. Looking back, I think we moved out of that house around 2019, maybe a little before then. My mom wanted to start fresh and move in with her partner, and honestly, I was relieved when we finally left. It was just me and my mom living there for years, probably since around 2011. I was still young when we moved in, but even then, I remember the house never felt right. It had this heavy feeling to it, the kind you can't really explain without sounding dramatic. My mom felt it too, though she didn't always admit it at the time. One of the first strange things happened right after we moved in. My auntie, Lauren, was helping us sort out my bedroom and carry things into the house. At one point, she and my mom stepped outside into the garden for a cigarette. From the garden, you could see through these big, clear windows into the dining room, and from there, you could see the archway that led into the living room. My auntie suddenly went quiet. Then she turned to my mom and said she'd just seen a man standing in the middle of that archway. My mom panicked straight away and ran inside, but there was nobody there. No open door, no sign of anyone getting in, nothing out of place, and my auntie didn't recognize the man at all. After that, little things kept happening. We used to hear creaking on the landing and the stairs all the time, day and night. My mom would always say, "It's just the house settling," and I believed her because I wanted to. But after we moved out, she admitted she only told me that so I wouldn't be scared. She said she knew something was wrong in that house. The stairs were the worst for me. I always hated standing at the bottom and looking up. It felt like something was watching from the top. Sometimes we'd catch these dark shapes or shadows out of the corner of our eyes, but we'd always blame it on being tired or imagining things. Then things got worse. My mom had a friend, Mark, who passed away suddenly, and she had been to his funeral. A few days after that, the atmosphere in the house changed. It felt more intense, more unsettled. One morning, my mom dropped me off at school like normal. Nothing strange had happened before we left, but when she came back home, the house was tidy except for her bedroom. Her room had been completely trashed. Her underwear was all over the floor. Jewelry had been pulled out and scattered everywhere. Drawers were emptied. Shoes were thrown around. Clothes had been ripped from hangers. She had this big wardrobe with several little doors, and every single one of them was wide open. The strangest part was that nothing was missing. She checked the whole house. No broken windows, no forced doors, no sign of anyone getting in. Everything that had been thrown around was still there. It was just everywhere, like someone had done it to frighten her. A little while after that, something happened with her glasses. She went to put them on one morning, and when she picked them up, they were snapped perfectly in the middle. The night before, they had been completely fine. We tried to come up with normal explanations, but none of them made sense. We didn't have pets then. Nobody else had been in her room. I hadn't touched them, and they weren't bent or crushed like someone had stepped on them. They were broken so cleanly, almost like they had been cut. Then we started finding this weird green slime along the tops of the door frames. That still bothers me. I wasn't a slime kid. I didn't own any slime, and at that time it wasn't really something I played with anyway. It was also way too high for either of us to reach easily. My mom is only about 5'3", and the door frames were much taller than that. There were more things that happened, but my mom brushed a lot of it off as coincidence and didn't always tell me everything. I think she was trying to protect me from being even more scared than I already was. But that house was strange. It never felt like we were alone there. I'm so glad we moved out. Sometimes I still wonder about the people who live there now, and whether they've ever felt it too. I'm 58 years old, and until this happened, I had never seen anything I would call a ghost. Not once. I wasn't the kind of person who went looking for things like that either. But after Martin died, something in my life shifted in a way I still don't fully understand. I hadn't spoken to him in almost 4 years. He had moved on, married someone else, and I had tried to keep living my life. But when I found out he had passed away, it broke something open in me. His funeral was streamed online, and I watched it over and over again. Not all at once, but enough times that I lost count. I was grieving so deeply that sometimes just thinking of him made these sounds come out of me, like my heart was crying before I could stop it. Around that same time, my little grandson got sick with some kind of virus, and I caught it from him. It knocked me down hard. I was in bed for 2 days, barely able to eat. I think all I managed was a couple of pieces of toast, some fruit, and water. On the second morning, I opened my eyes, and there he was. Martin's head was floating in the air near my bed. I just stared at him. He stared right back at me. I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. He looked over toward the wall for a moment, even though there was nothing there, and then he looked back at me. We stayed like that, just looking at each other, until he slowly drifted away and disappeared. I was so shaken I couldn't even get out of bed. I stayed there frozen until my daughter came into the room, and when I finally told her what I saw, she didn't laugh. She just said, "I believe you." And I needed that more than I can explain. The next morning, I was half asleep when it felt like someone hit me in the face. I woke up fast, but nobody was there. I wondered if I had dreamed it, but then the sightings kept happening. Back at home, I started seeing his head floating around my room. At first, I got emotional when I saw him. I wasn't really scared. It felt more sad than anything, like my grief had taken shape and was moving through the air. But then it changed. One night, I realized it wasn't just one head. There were several. 3 of them were near the foot of my bed, watching me. Others appeared along the wall. One looked almost animal-like, with a lion's face. Another looked like a woman. One looked like someone I used to know years ago. And then there was Martin again. I remember thinking, what in the world is going on? After that, things got stranger. I would wake up and something would be right in my face, moving its tongue near me or breathing this strange green mist toward me. I was exhausted and desperate for rest, so one night I took my regular medicine and a sleeping pill, hoping I could finally sleep through it. But instead, it felt like I was shown something. I saw the figure rise toward the light on my ceiling fan, and then it began to form a body. First the spine, then the arms, then the ribs and chest. It was like watching a skeleton become real piece by piece. Inside the chest was this purplish blue glow, with tiny white sparks flickering like little fireworks. And even though I was frightened, part of me was amazed. I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. Then the image changed. I saw him on the wall, full-bodied now, struggling with a huge snake. It looked like an anaconda. He fought it, but he couldn't win. The snake bit his head off and swallowed it, and I watched his head move down through the snake's body until the whole scene shifted again into something intimate and disturbing with a woman. I was stunned, completely stunned. This has been going on since January. I've gone to a mental health doctor because I needed to know if something was wrong with me, if I was losing my mind, or if grief had done something to me that I couldn't control. All I know is this: I want it gone now. Him, them, whatever it is. I have asked them to leave. I have commanded them to leave. I have rebuked them. I have prayed. And at this point, I truly don't know what else to do. It happened late one night while I was home with my partner. She had gone to sleep earlier than me, and I just couldn't settle down. I didn't want to wake her with the TV or the light from my phone, so I quietly left the bedroom and went into the living room. Now, I should say, I've used substances before. Usually nothing too extreme, just enough to shift my headspace a little. But that night, I made the choice to take more than I normally would. I think I was chasing something deeper, something stronger than usual. So I sat down on the couch, put my headphones on, and started watching videos about spiritual awakening, consciousness, hidden realities, that kind of thing. At first, everything felt normal. Then suddenly, it didn't. I remember feeling like reality itself started to loosen around me. It wasn't like seeing random shapes or colors. It felt bigger than that. It felt like the room was unfolding, almost like the 3 dimensions I understood were bending open, making space for something else to come through. And then, I realized I didn't know where I was anymore. The living room was gone, or maybe it was still there, but I couldn't make sense of it. Space didn't behave the way it was supposed to. Nothing lined up. That's when someone, or something, took my hand. The figure looked almost human, but not quite. It seemed like it was made from smooth, pale stone, gray and polished, like a statue that had somehow learned how to move. It told me not to be afraid. It said I was with them. Then it guided me into what looked like a room. Inside, there were 5 more beings just like it. All of them had that same gray, sculpted look. Even their hair didn't look like real hair. It was more like rounded patterns carved into their heads, almost decorative. And when they noticed me, they started speaking Spanish. But the strange thing was, they weren't speaking to me. They just kept talking among themselves, like I was barely worth acknowledging. Like I had wandered into a place where I wasn't supposed to matter. They were arguing about who would be next to intervene. I didn't understand everything they said, but I understood enough to feel deeply unsettled. From what I gathered, they were taking turns interfering with human timelines. They were trying to create events that people like us would interpret as miracles, and to them, it was a game. They were betting on who could influence a life, shift an outcome, or create something impossible enough that humans would believe it was divine. Whoever succeeded would win some kind of token. I remember seeing it clearly. It looked almost like a pine cone, except it was the same flat gray color as they were, like it had been carved from the same strange stone. After a while, I started feeling wrong there. Not scared exactly, more like I was out of place, out of rhythm. Like my presence in that space was a mistake that was beginning to correct itself. Then everything started breaking apart. Their world and my living room began overlapping, flickering through each other like bad reception. Shapes blurred, walls folded into shadows. The figures started dissolving into pieces of my own reality. And then, without understanding how it happened, I was back on my couch. The headphones were still on. The room was quiet. My partner was still asleep. I just sat there for a long time, trying to breathe normally and make sense of what I had experienced. And the thought that stayed with me was not comforting. It was this feeling that there may be things out there far beyond us, things capable of reaching into our lives in ways we can't even recognize. And maybe, to them, what we call miracles are just moves in a game we don't even know we're playing. I grew up in the Bronx, and for a long time, that was the only home I really knew. But when I was around 10, my mother packed up me and my brother and moved us way up to northern New York. The reason was heavy. My father's killer had been released from prison, and my mom had family up there, so she wanted distance, safety, a fresh start, or at least something close to one. A few years after that, my grandfather sold his place back in the Bronx and came up to be near us. He bought a house on the north side of town, not far from the river, and eventually we all moved in with him. The house itself looked normal. It was a nice double-wide prefab with an added extension and garage. Out back, there were sliding glass doors that led to a cement patio with a wooden roof over it. Beyond that was maybe half an acre of yard, an above-ground pool with a wooden deck, and a big tool shed near the woods. The whole property ended where the tree line began, and almost as soon as we moved in, something felt off. At first, it wasn't dramatic. Nothing flew across the room. No voices whispered from closets. It was just this feeling, especially at night, that something was watching from the woods. As I got older, it became harder to ignore. In the winter, I would find footprints in the snow going all the way around the house. They would stop in front of every window, facing inward. At the time, I thought maybe we had a stalker. Honestly, that seemed like the least terrifying explanation. In high school, I met my best friend, who I'll call Chris. He wasn't just someone I hung out with. He was the first person in that town who really had my back. I didn't have many friends there. A lot of people treated me like I didn't belong because I was Hispanic and from New York City. But Chris stood up for me when nobody else did. We started exploring the woods behind the house. Those woods always had a strange feeling to them, but we were teenagers, so of course we kept going back. We even built this awful little structure out of fallen logs and called it the fort. We would hang out there, goof around, sometimes pretend we were on some grand adventure. One day, while wandering deeper than usual, we found this weird pit in the ground. I still don't know why, but we decided to dig into it. After maybe 3 feet, we hit something metal. It turned out to be a buried shopping cart, and it looked like it was blocking some kind of crude tunnel. That scared us badly enough that we left right away. We said we would come back the next summer, but when we tried, we either couldn't find the spot again, or it had been covered over. Later, when we were a little older, we started doing the kind of dumb stuff teenage guys do. Sometimes we would sneak a beer or two from the fridge and go drink them in a smaller shed my grandfather had built near the edge of the woods. We just called it the shed. Outside that shed, I dug a fire pit into the dirt and circled it with rocks. That was when things really started changing. One night, Chris and I were inside the shed when we heard footsteps outside. Not just random animal sounds. It sounded like someone walking around the walls. Chris heard it too. We both went quiet and looked at each other with that silent, awful question. Are you hearing this? Then the footsteps stopped, and something started pounding on the walls. We froze. I don't know how long we sat there without making a sound. It felt endless. When the banging finally stopped and we thought it was safe, we ran back to the house and locked every door behind us. You'd think that would have been enough to keep us away from the shed. It wasn't. We kept going back. Maybe we were curious. Maybe we were stupid. Maybe, after a while, fear starts to feel familiar if you live beside it long enough. Most nights we would hear rustling or footsteps. Some nights the banging came back. Eventually, as strange as this sounds, it became part of the routine. Then one night, we saw it. It was probably after midnight. We had a fire going outside the shed. The house was off to our left, the shed was to our right, and the tree line was in front of us. I heard rustling ahead. When I looked up, my whole body locked. There was a figure standing in the trees. It was tall, too tall, thin in a way that looked wrong. It seemed naked, but its skin was so dark that it didn't look like skin at all. There was no texture, no detail. It was like a piece of the night had peeled itself loose and stood upright. And it had no face, no eyes, no mouth. Nothing. It leaned forward slowly, like it was studying us. For a second I thought, this is it. I finally lost my mind. Then I realized Chris was already running for the house, so I ran too. That was the first time, but it wasn't the last. After that, we saw it more than once, usually on nights when we had a fire going. Eventually, we stopped using the fire pit and started using this old rusty chimenea the previous owners had left on the patio, but it didn't matter. Fire seemed to draw it in. When we were older, Chris started dating the girl I'll call Valeria. She came over a lot, and there's one night with her that I'll never forget. I was in my bedroom. Chris was taking a shower across the hall. Valeria was in the dining room, just outside my door to the right. Near the bathroom, there was a little laundry room with a back door that opened onto a small wooden porch leading down to the patio. We always kept that door locked. I was sitting in my room when I heard a massive crash, followed by Valeria screaming. I ran out, and she was standing there pale, pointing toward the laundry room. She yelled, "Something busted it open!" The back door was wide open. I know this next part was reckless. I know it. But in that moment, I was terrified, and I felt sure that whatever had been watching us had finally decided to come inside. I grabbed my grandfather's little .22 rifle and fired into the woods, away from the houses, yelling at whatever was out there. By then, Chris had come out of the bathroom in a towel, and he screamed, "What are you doing? If that's a person, you could kill them." And the way he said it stuck with me. If that's a person, because that meant he was thinking the same thing I was. It wasn't. Years later, after I graduated, and after Chris and Valeria had split up, I started dating a girl I'll call Noelle. That matters because of what happened later. One night near the end of winter, I stepped outside the sliding doors to smoke. While I was standing there, I heard what sounded like an old musket going off. At the same time, snow exploded out from the tree line, like something huge had blasted through it. I ran inside, and instead of calling the police like a normal person, I called Chris. He came over, and we grabbed rifles and flashlights and searched the woods. We found nothing. No person. No tracks. Not a single footprint in the snow anywhere near where the blast had come from. That bothered me for a long time. A few months later, Noelle and I got closer, and I finally told her about everything that had happened on the property. I expected her to think I was out of my mind. She didn't. She just said she wanted to see it for herself. I told her it seemed to show up more often when we had fires, so she suggested we invite a couple of her friends over and sit out on the patio with the chimenea going. That night, we were all outside, laughing, talking, trying to keep things light. The chairs were facing the tree line. The fire was burning. At some point, I glanced toward the shed. And there it was. It was walking along the tree line, moving from the shed toward the house. Not rushing, not hiding, just walking. And I remember almost smiling because a strange thought hit me. This is the moment I find out if I'm crazy or not. It passed right in front of us, turned its head toward where we were sitting, and then kept moving along the edge of the house. I didn't say anything. I just turned to look at Noelle. Her face said everything. She was pale, eyes wide, jaw slightly open, staring in the exact direction where I had seen it. Then she shouted and ran inside. We never had another fire together after that. A few weeks later, we went to a Civil War reenactment at a local state park. While we were there, I found a book about local history. I started flipping through it and came across a story about the indigenous people who had lived in that area before the town existed. According to the book, there had been a longhouse near the river. One night, French soldiers came down the river and burned it with people still inside. On the next page, there was an old map showing the approximate location. I recognized it immediately. The river on the map was the same river across the road from our property, and the longhouse, or at least where they believed it had stood, was practically right where we lived. That was when everything clicked into place for me. The land, the fires, the thing in the woods, the feeling of being watched, the way it seemed to appear when flames were burning. I don't know what I believe with absolute certainty, but I know what I saw, and I know what that place felt like. The ending of it all still haunts me. A few years later, I had failed out of college and was living back with my grandfather. I was in a rough place then, drinking too much, not taking care of myself the way I should have been. One day, I drank heavily and passed out. I should mention that our smoke alarms didn't work. I woke up suddenly from a dead sleep, completely alert, with this strange, urgent feeling in my body. I walked out of my room and saw my grandfather in the kitchen trying to fight a huge fire on the stove. He was about to throw water on it, but I stopped him. It was a grease fire. I grabbed salt and smothered the flames. Then I looked up and saw something that made my stomach drop. The inside of the vent fan was glowing, and the fan was still running. I knew we had to get out. I grabbed the wireless house phone and got my grandfather outside. But when I tried to call 911, the phone was dead. So I did something stupid. I ran back in. The smoke was so thick I couldn't see. I had to move by memory, one hand out, choking on the air, with the kitchen glowing through the haze behind me. I made it to my room and searched for the other phone. I shook a blanket, saw a tiny glimmer of light reflect off the screen, grabbed it, and ran back outside. I called 911, but I barely got the words out before the line went dead from the fire. Later, they told us the ventilation above the stove had plastic parts inside. Even though I put out the visible fire, it had already spread. The plastic melted. The insulation caught. They said we had maybe 2 minutes. If I hadn't woken up when I did, my grandfather and I would have died in that house. We never went back to the property after that. And I know how this sounds. I know there are parts of it that people will try to explain away. I've tried to do that myself. But there's something deeply unsettling about almost burning to death in that house, on that land, after everything that happened there. To this day, I believe it was all connected. And I believe what we saw in those woods was a Wendigo. I'm not gonna lie, I'm still shaken up from what happened last night. There's this stretch of woods not too far from my house, and around here, everybody's got a story about that place. People say it's haunted, and honestly, after everything I've experienced out there, I don't really laugh that stuff off anymore. My cousin and I went out there late to smoke by the river. At one point, he sent me down the trail alone to fill up a bottle with water for the bong. I've had weird things happen in those woods before too. Tall, shadowy figures, something pale running on all fours near the road one night. That heavy feeling like you've stepped somewhere you absolutely do not belong. Just a lot of stuff that leaves you with this deep, sick feeling in your stomach. But that night, I wasn't listening to any of that. I was feeling way too confident. We had a weapon back at the car, and I guess I let that get in my head. So while I was out there alone, way too far from my cousin, way too far from the car, I said something stupid. I actually called out into the woods. I said, "Hey, Spooky Joey, you out here?" The second I think back on that, I cringe. It was so dumb. I was basically mocking whatever's out there, like I invited it to notice me. I got to the water, and that's when I started hearing these strange thuds off in the distance. Then I heard this loud whoop, like somebody yelling with this weird burst of excitement. Not like a normal voice either. It echoed in a way that made my skin crawl. I filled the bottle as fast as I could and started heading back. That's when I heard it. This laugh. Faint at first, then again, and then one more time. Enough that I couldn't pretend I was imagining it anymore. It sounded far off, but clear enough to make my chest tighten. It felt like something was letting me know, "I hear you. I'm here." I got back to the car, trying to act normal, and we started smoking in the parking lot by the river. It's a pretty open area, but on both sides it's just thick forest. And the woods to our right were way too active. My cousin suddenly looked up and saw this small, amber-colored light moving through the tree branches. He said it looked almost like a little glowing ball, maybe the size of a fist, weaving between the limbs. I didn't catch it myself, but the look on his face told me he wasn't messing around. Then we started hearing footsteps. Not close enough to see anyone, but definitely there. Like something pacing through the brush. Every so often we'd hear a noise like something being dropped on the ground. Once, I swear I saw a shape rise up just above the bushes, like it was peeking at us, and then it ducked down again so fast I almost questioned myself. The worst part, though, was the voices. Every now and then, we'd hear what sounded like people talking somewhere deeper in the woods. Not loud enough to understand, just broken pieces of conversation drifting toward us. A word here, another word there, and then another voice answering back. That's what really got to me. It sounded like more than one thing out there. And mixed in with that, we kept hearing those whoops again. Some distant screams, too. Maybe animals, maybe not. But one of them, I swear, sounded like a grown man yelling. That area is isolated, especially that late at night. The parking lot was empty except for our car. There shouldn't have been anyone else out there. Toward the end, that bad feeling finally hit me. You know that heavy, sinking feeling where your body knows before your mind does? That's what it was. Like every instinct in me was saying, "You need to leave right now." Then we heard that chuckling again. No bugs, no frogs, nothing. It was like the whole woods had gone still, like even the trees were holding their breath. We left right after that. Whatever it was, it didn't follow our car this time. And that's the only good thing I can say. Because the last few times we'd been out there, it did. You know, looking back, I think I felt something was wrong with that house long before I ever had a reason to say it out loud. It was a fairly new place, built sometime around 2001 or so. A 3-bedroom duplex with 2.5 bathrooms and a finished basement. My parents owned it, and I rented it from them. And no, before you ask, there was definitely no family discount involved. At that point in my life, work was unstable, and everything felt kind of up in the air. So I wanted somewhere I could leave without getting tangled in a long lease. My parents liked the setup too, because if they ever needed to stay nearby for a few days, they had a place. On paper, it sounded perfect. But once I actually moved in, it just never felt right. I lived there by myself, which normally I liked, but honestly, the place felt way too big for one person. I barely used half of it. The basement was finished, and I had boxes of old collectibles and hobby stuff down there, but I almost never went in. There was a guest room upstairs with a bed my parents had put together, and that room mostly just sat there, untouched. Really, I only lived in a few corners of the house. My bedroom, the bathroom, the kitchen, and my office where I'd mess around on my computer. Even then, I had these habits that didn't make much sense. I never played games with headphones on. I always hurried to my room at night. And I never slept with the bedroom door open. Ever. Closed and locked every night. I had lived alone before, so it wasn't that. It was just that something in that house made me feel constantly on edge, like I could never fully relax. I used to hear noises all the time too. Thumps. Heavy bumps. What sounded like slow footsteps. Since it was a duplex, I kept telling myself it had to be the neighbors. But the weird thing was, I never heard normal neighbor sounds. No TV, no music, no muffled conversations. Just those dull, heavy thuds, like someone walking around with purpose. About a year later, my girlfriend started staying over more often. Things were good between us, and she helped me make the place feel warmer. We moved furniture around, added softer lighting, tried to make it feel less sterile. And still, no matter what we changed, there were parts of that house that felt deeply wrong. The guest room felt wrong. The upstairs hallway felt wrong. And the basement was the worst of all. It always felt like someone was standing just out of sight, watching. One night, we decided to try using the basement like a normal room. We brought blankets down, turned on a movie, tried to have a cozy little movie night. We lasted maybe half an hour. That was it. We both started feeling so uncomfortable we had to leave. My chest felt tight, and my girlfriend said it felt like something was pressing at her throat, like it was getting hard to breathe down there. That should have been enough for me, honestly. But the worst part of living there wasn't even when I was awake. It was the nightmares. There was one night when my girlfriend and I fell asleep with the bedroom door open, wide open, which almost never happened. That was the first time I saw it. In the dream, there was this figure standing at the foot of the bed. It was impossibly tall, almost touching the ceiling, maybe 8 feet or more. Its body was thin and bone-white, like it had been carved out of something dead and dry. Its hands ended in long, hooked claws. Its face was hollow, with deep black eyes, but way down in those sockets there was this red glow, like embers buried in ash. Its mouth hung open full of sharp teeth, and behind it were these wing-like bones, almost like the frame of bat wings without any skin or flesh. And it just stood there, staring at me, growling. I got up, went straight to the bathroom, then came back, shut the door, locked it, and only then could I even think about sleeping again. The thing is, that nightmare didn't happen once. It happened again, and again, and again. At least 5 more times while I lived there. And every single time, the bedroom door had been left open. Sometimes not even all the way, just cracked. At one point, I even tested it. I asked my girlfriend to wait until I was asleep and then open the door without telling me. I didn't know she'd done it. That night, I had the nightmare again. After a while, it stopped feeling like a dream and started feeling like some kind of pattern I couldn't explain. Then one night, something happened that changed the way I looked at all of it. I'd had that same nightmare again, but this time I woke up on my own before my girlfriend could shake me. I turned, half awake, trying to settle back down, and for just a second, I saw a woman standing beside the bed. She looked young, maybe mid-20s, light blonde hair, a dark headband. She had on a pale shirt and denim overalls. What struck me most was that she wasn't looking at me. She was looking toward the foot of the bed, exactly where that thing usually stood in the nightmare. Then I fully woke up, and she was gone. After that, both my girlfriend and I started to feel like there were maybe 2 different presences in the house. There was whatever that awful thing was, and then there was her. I'd be playing violin in the house by myself and get that prickling feeling that someone was listening. I'd turn around and almost catch movement slipping around the corner into the hall. My girlfriend would be folding clothes and suddenly swear she'd seen a woman in her peripheral vision. She'd hear noises when I wasn't even home. And somehow, over time, the feeling of being watched didn't always feel threatening. Sometimes it felt more like being observed by someone curious, quiet, present. The last really major thing that happened was not long before we moved out. I got hit with a brutal stomach bug one night, and my girlfriend had to be up early for work. I didn't want to keep her awake running back and forth to the bathroom, so I took a blanket and went into the guest room. Since I felt so sick, I left the door open. I was lying there, curled up, miserable, when I heard footsteps in the hallway. Not subtle footsteps, not house creaks. Actual footsteps. Slow, heavy, unmistakable. They came down the hall, into the guest room, up behind me. Then I felt the mattress dip, like someone had sat down on the edge of the bed. And then I felt a hand on my back. I mean that literally. I felt a hand resting on my back. And the strangest part is, I wasn't scared. The second I felt it, this huge wave of calm came over me. It was like all the pain and panic just softened. The hand moved gently, almost the way someone might rub your back when you're sick, like it was saying, "You're okay, just rest. You'll be all right by morning." And that night, for the first time with an open door, I slept straight through. No nightmare, no terror, nothing. After that, whenever I felt like I caught a glimpse of that woman around the house, I'd just say out loud, "Can you give me a little space right now? Thank you." And weirdly enough, it always seemed to help. I honestly got the feeling she liked being nearby when we were just living our lives. Cooking, folding laundry, playing music, moving through the house. Almost like she was drawn to that kind of ordinary warmth. And whenever one of us was hurting, it felt like she came closer, not to frighten us, but to comfort us. We did have one eerie bit of confirmation, if you want to call it that. A mutual friend of ours was into psychic stuff, and one time she came by during a party. With a bunch of people in the house, she said she didn't pick up much of anything. But later, when it was just the 3 of us, her whole expression changed. She looked upstairs and said, "It was outside your room before. Now it's downstairs. I really don't like whatever's in the basement." Then she described seeing a blonde woman with a headband in the upstairs hall. I had never told her that detail. Not once. That really stayed with me. It's been well over a year since we moved out now, and ever since leaving that place, everything stopped. No nightmares. No strange footsteps. No feeling of being watched. Nothing paranormal at all in our new home. And honestly, part of me still kicks myself for not trying harder to document it, because I know how unbelievable it sounds when you say it out loud. But when I think back on that house, what stays with me most isn't even the fear. It's the feeling that whatever was there wasn't just one thing. And somehow, in the middle of all that darkness, there was also something that seemed to care whether we were okay. Okay, so this is going to sound ridiculous, and honestly, I still feel a little silly saying it out loud. I've lived in my family's house for basically my whole life, close to 2 decades, and nothing strange had ever happened there before. It was always just home. Normal, quiet, familiar. If anyone brought up ghosts or hauntings or anything supernatural, I was always the person saying there had to be a logical explanation. Even now, at 25, that's still where my mind usually goes. But over the last few weeks, a couple of things happened that I still can't explain, and that's the only reason I'm even telling this story. Lately, I'd been digging into my Pennsylvania Dutch roots, mostly because I love local history. I got especially interested in powwow traditions and all the old folklore tied to them. I live not too far from a place with a long history connected to those stories, so I started reading everything I could find. It was fascinating stuff. I wasn't scared of it at all. I was just curious. The first weird thing happened one night after I'd spent a long time reading. I got up from my room upstairs and started walking toward the hall so I could go down the steps. The second I crossed my bedroom doorway, it was like I walked straight into this overwhelming wave of terror. And I don't mean I got startled. I mean full-body, instant, crushing fear. My chest tightened, my heart started pounding, and for a few seconds it felt like all I could do was keep moving forward. I could breathe, technically, but it felt like I couldn't. My mind just went blank. I remember getting to the top of the stairs and stopping there, trying to catch my breath, thinking, what was that? The strangest part is that I reacted in a way I normally never would. I made the sign of the cross without even thinking about it, and I'm not even religious like that. It was just pure instinct. After a minute, the feeling was gone, almost as suddenly as it had started. I kept telling myself I must have spooked myself somehow. Maybe I was too immersed in the reading. Maybe I was anxious without realizing it. But the truth is, I hadn't felt scared before that moment at all. I was interested, not frightened. So that explanation never sat right with me. I didn't tell anyone. It sounded made up, even to me. Then a little while later, something else happened. It was daytime this time, bright out, and I was home alone. A delivery driver had just dropped off groceries, and my dogs, like always, started barking. Once the driver left, one of them settled down, but my older dog kept acting like somebody was still there. He went straight to the basement door and got weirdly focused on it. He was sniffing around, pacing a little, whining, staying right by the door like he was waiting for someone to come up. He only really acts like that when a family member comes in through the basement entrance. So I remember thinking it was odd right away, because I knew for a fact nobody else was home. So I walked over, and then I heard it. Footsteps. Very clear footsteps coming up the basement stairs. They were light, not heavy like boots or anything, but unmistakable. The old stairs have this specific sound when someone's on them, and that's exactly what it was. Step by step, getting closer to the door. Then it stopped. I just stood there frozen for a second, and then I locked the basement door. A few seconds later, the footsteps started again, but this time they went back down. Slow, steady, calm. Not rushed, just descending until the sound faded out. And my dog stayed right there, still watching the door, still waiting. Since then, nothing else has happened. And honestly, that might be the part that gets me the most. My house had always felt completely ordinary before, and now it does again. Whatever those moments were, they came out of nowhere and then just stopped. The only pattern I can think of is that both things happened when I was really deep into researching that history. Maybe it's connected. Maybe it isn't. Maybe I just noticed things I normally would have brushed off. I still don't know what I believe. I just know that for the first time in my life, my home felt unfamiliar, and I still can't fully explain why. So, this happened a few years ago, when I was about 20. I met this American traveler at a bus station in Paris. His name was Luca. He was a little older than me, maybe 28, and we ended up talking while we were waiting for our bus. It was one of those conversations that feels random at first, and then, suddenly you realize you've been sitting there for ages, completely absorbed. Luca had that kind of life that instantly pulls you in. He told me he spent part of the year back in the US, in Oregon, where he stayed with his mother, and the rest of the time traveling however he could, sometimes hiking, sometimes sailing. He worked in marine equipment, something to do with designing ropes and rigging for boats. I didn't fully understand it, but it sounded fascinating. He had this adventurous, restless energy, and before we parted, we exchanged Facebook contacts and stayed in touch. At that point in my life, I had just started university. I was living in a new city. It was cold. I didn't know many people yet, and I spent most evenings alone. I wasn't really going out much. I mostly stayed in, listening to music, watching shows, drawing, playing games, that kind of thing. So when Luca and I started talking regularly, it became this strange little window into another world. Because of the time difference, we usually spoke very late at night. Sometimes I'd still be awake at 2 or 3 in the morning, just listening to him tell story after story. And every single time, it felt like he had lived 10 lives already. He'd tell me about solo hikes, storms at sea, nights in tiny ports, strange encounters in the wilderness. Once he told me that while hiking alone in the mountains, he came across wild coyotes and had to fire his pistol into the air to scare them off. I remember just sitting there thinking, what kind of life is this? It felt so far from mine, almost unreal. At first, I was just captivated. He came from this place that seemed exotic to me, and everything about him felt bigger, rougher, more cinematic. Talking to him was an escape from my quiet little routine. But after a while, his stories started getting stranger. One night, he told me that while sailing near the Caribbean, he had seen the Flying Dutchman. I laughed immediately. I thought he was joking, but he wasn't smiling. He was completely serious. So I told him, half teasing, to keep going. And he did. He said the weather had changed all at once. The sea had gone strange, heavy somehow. And then he saw this enormous old ship ahead of him. Dark, silent, like something from another century. What really unsettled him, he said, was that it didn't appear on his radar at all. At first he thought it might be some abandoned vessel drifting at sea, maybe after an accident. So he moved closer. He said it looked ancient, and even though he couldn't see anyone on deck, he could hear music coming from it. That detail really stayed with me. The idea of hearing music from an empty ship in the middle of the sea. He said something about it felt deeply wrong. So he turned away and left as fast as he could. I didn't know what to do with that story. Part of me thought, Okay, this is ridiculous. But another part of me was so fascinated by the way he told it. Not dramatically, not like he was trying to impress me, just plainly. Like he was describing something that had happened. And because of that, I didn't dismiss it completely. Then one night, he brought up something I had never even heard of before. The Wendigo. He said that one evening, after a long day of hiking, they'd made camp, built a fire, eaten dinner, and were sitting there talking as it got dark. And then suddenly, Luca felt that there was something else there with them. He said he saw a shape near the fire. Not clearly, not like a normal person standing there, but some kind of figure, a presence, seated close by. At the same moment, his friend looked straight at him and silently signaled for him not to react, not to stare, not to acknowledge it. So they kept their eyes mostly on each other and tried to ignore whatever was beside them. Luca told me his friend had tears in his eyes. That's one of the details that really got to me. The fear of it felt real. After a few minutes, the presence was gone. Later, his friend explained that it was a Wendigo and said you should never give it attention because attention feeds it. Ignore it, and eventually it leaves. I remember exactly how I felt while he was telling me this, because it was late, my apartment was dark, and I was already the kind of person who got a little uneasy at night. Then he joked, very casually, that maybe there was one in my attic. And I know it sounds silly, but I was genuinely terrified. I barely moved after that conversation. I lay awake until morning, staring into the dark. What made it so disturbing wasn't just the story itself. It was the sincerity. He never sounded like someone trying to scare me for fun. He sounded like someone telling me the truth. The last part is the one I still think about the most. Luca lived part of the year with his mother in an old house in Oregon. He told me from the very beginning that the house was haunted, but he said it so calmly that it almost disarmed me. He talked about it the way someone might talk about a leaky faucet or a creaky floorboard. Just a fact of daily life. He said he and his mother had learned to live with whatever was there, that you had to respect the place, respect the people who had been there before, and not fight everything you didn't understand. There was one area of the house he especially hated, the basement. He told me that when he was younger, he had felt something hostile down there. He said he once saw a face watching him from the dark, and that there was a large black mark on one of the stone walls that seemed to hold all the bad energy in the room. After that, he avoided going down there whenever he could. Naturally, I was curious. So one day I asked him to show me the house over video call. It was nighttime for me and afternoon for him. He started walking around, showing me little things that had become normal to them. Small bowls of salt placed in certain corners, mirrors on the window ledges. He explained that his mother believed they helped with the energy in the house. Then he passed through one room and said, very casually, "The lights switch on by themselves sometimes. We just turn them off when we notice." And sure enough, a lamp was on for no apparent reason. He went into the living room and showed me this heavy wooden cabinet. He said the drawers always slid open on their own, and that he and his mother were used to pushing them shut whenever they walked by. A couple of them were open while he was filming, so he closed them. One of the drawers had nothing in it except a Bible, which at the time I found strangely funny. Then he brought me to a hallway. There was a trap door in the floor leading down to the basement. He didn't open it. He just stepped closer to show me. And the moment he did, my phone started going crazy. The image broke apart into colored static, red and blue streaks across the screen. The sound turned into this horrible, distorted crackling, and underneath it, there was this deep buzzing noise. Everything froze and stuttered for a few seconds. And then, just like that, the image cleared. He had backed away fast. I asked him if he had seen what happened, and he said yes. He told me he had never seen the call glitch like that before. What struck me was that he wasn't screaming or panicking. He looked shaken, definitely, but he wasn't hysterical. Meanwhile, I was absolutely frozen. My heart was pounding so hard it felt painful. Even though I was thousands of kilometers away, it felt like something had crossed the distance between us for those few seconds. Like whatever was in that house had brushed right up against me too. And I remember thinking, what if he's been telling the truth this whole time? We stayed on the call. After a while, the tension eased a little, and we started talking about something else. Then I heard a sound. At first, I couldn't place it. It was low, steady, almost vibrating. Then I realized it was a voice. Very deep voice. Not speaking English, not speaking anything I could recognize. Just reciting something in this slow, solemn, chant-like way. I was studying linguistics back then, and I was obsessed with languages, accents, sound patterns, all of that. But this, I couldn't identify it at all. It didn't sound like normal speech to me. It sounded almost ritualistic, like a prayer being intoned by someone with an impossibly deep voice. I asked Luca if he heard it too. He said yes. He followed the sound into the living room, and it seemed to be coming from a Bluetooth speaker that was lying on the floor, plugged in to charge. But the speaker was off. He picked it up, messed with it, and the chanting stopped. Then, almost immediately, another voice came through, this time clearly in English. It turned out the television had turned itself on, and the news was playing. I asked him if the TV had already been on. He said no. He switched it off, and after that, everything went quiet. Nothing dramatic happened after that. No final reveal, no explanation, no neat ending. Eventually, life moved on. I met someone, got into a relationship, changed my routines, and Luca and I slowly lost touch. But I still think about him. For a long time, I kept him in this category in my mind. An eccentric, maybe a storyteller, maybe someone who blurred truth and fiction because he liked the effect it had. And honestly, part of me still wonders if that's all it was. But that night on the video call unsettled me in a way I still can't fully explain. I can still picture the static. I can still hear that voice. And every now and then, I catch myself thinking about all those stories again. The ghost ship, the thing in the woods, the basement, the speaker, the TV, and asking myself the same question I asked that night. What if he really was telling the truth? I need to tell you about something that happened to me, because even now, I still can't fully explain it. At the time, I was in a really bad place mentally. I'd just come out of the end of a long relationship, almost a decade, and it completely broke me. On top of that, I was serving time. I'd already done about a year, got out for a short while, then got recalled and sent back, this time to an old Victorian prison in Hull. Somehow, I managed to get a cell on my own, and honestly, that probably helped keep me together more than anything else. I wasn't taking drugs. I wasn't losing touch with reality. Nothing like that. I was just hurting deeply. Properly low. The kind of low where your mind goes to dark places even when you don't want it to. Anyway, this happened late one night, around 1:45 to midnight. I'd switched the TV off and was trying to get to sleep. The cell wasn't completely dark because the yard lights came through the bars, so I could still make out the room. I was lying flat on my back, looking up toward the ceiling, with the wall to my left and the rest of the cell open on my right. My eyes had only been shut a few minutes. I wasn't asleep. Maybe I was just starting to drift, but I was definitely not gone. Then I opened my eyes. And there it was. Standing right over me was this figure, about 3 or maybe 4 feet tall, thin, shaped like a person but not really human looking. It was completely black. Not just shadow black either. I mean the darkest black I've ever seen in my life. No face, no eyes, no detail at all. Just this solid, unnatural darkness leaning over my stomach, close enough that it should have been touching me, but it wasn't. I reacted instantly. I shot up, slammed myself against the wall, and scrambled to the end of the bed where the light switch and TV were. I was yelling, swinging, kicking, throwing punches, full panic, pure terror. But every time I tried to hit it, my hands just went straight through it. Like there was nothing there physically, even though I could see it as clearly as anything else in the room. That's the part that still gets me. It didn't jump back. It didn't react. It didn't rush at me. It just stayed there, perfectly still, in the exact same position. Then it started to fade. Slowly. Not instantly, not like something in a dream where it just disappears and you wake up confused. It took maybe 10, maybe 15 seconds to fully go. And I was wide awake the entire time, absolutely hysterical, heart pounding so hard I could hear it. Once it was gone, I turned the TV back on just to ground myself, to check the time, to prove to myself I was really awake. It was 12:01 a.m. The next day I told the prison officers and they just laughed it off. Said it was sleep paralysis. But they didn't really listen to what I was saying. I kept telling them I wasn't paralyzed. I moved straight away. I jumped up. I ran. I fought. One of the prison chaplains offered to bless the cell, which honestly unsettled me even more. Because why offer that unless he'd heard something similar before? Then I found out something else. Another prisoner had taken his own life that same night. When I heard the rough timeline from staff checks, it sounded like it could have happened not long before, or not long after, what I experienced. Now, I'm not saying the two things were connected. I honestly don't know what to think. But once that thought got into my head, I couldn't shake it. For the next 4 months of my sentence, I slept with the light on every single night. And sometimes, even when there was nothing there, I could still feel a presence in the cell. You know that feeling when you just know someone else is in the room, even if you can't see them? It felt exactly like that. I've never experienced anything like it before, and never since. I'm not even someone who goes around believing in ghosts or spirits. I've always tried to be rational about things. But this felt real. And I still don't know what it was. So, this happened in early August of 2023, when I was wrapping up the 5th day of a solo motorcycle trip back home. I've been on the road for days, just me, my bike, and whatever I could strap down and carry. That night, I booked a campsite near the lake at Lincoln Trail State Park in Marshall, Illinois, thinking I'd have a simple place to rest before finishing the trip. But when I got there, the site that was marked online as a tent campsite was actually covered in rough gravel. It was obviously meant more for an RV than for somebody trying to sleep in a little tent. Since I was traveling light, I didn't have any extra padding or ground cover with me, nothing that would make sleeping on that gravel even remotely comfortable. So I started looking around. Just north of the campsite, the ground dropped off toward the lake through a wooded slope. I tied off a bright guideline to a tree and made my way carefully down the incline. A little ways in, maybe 15 yards or so from the water, I found a patch of level, dry ground where the trees opened up just enough. It felt tucked away, quiet, and a lot softer than the campsite above, so I decided that was where I'd set up for the night. I pitched my tent, laid out my sleeping gear, and then climbed back up using the guideline just to make sure I could get in and out safely. Back at the main site, I had a simple dinner, one of those ready-to-eat meals, washed up as best I could, and turned in sometime around 9:30. I wasn't especially on edge that night. I was tired, sure, but not completely worn down. Honestly, I usually enjoy traveling alone. There's a kind of peace in it, you know? No schedule, no pressure, just the road and your own thoughts. And I'm not somebody who remembers dreams very often, which is part of why this stuck with me the way it did. At some point in the night, I dreamed I was sitting outside my tent in that exact same spot, except it was daytime. Bright, still, calm. I was facing the lake, just looking out over the water, when all at once everything went silent. And I mean completely silent. No birds, no insects, no movement in the trees, not even wind. It was the kind of silence that makes your skin go cold before your mind even catches up. That's when I noticed someone coming toward me from along the shoreline to the east. At first, it was just the figure of a woman moving slowly in my direction. But the closer she got, the more wrong she looked. She seemed frail, almost unnaturally so. Her skin had this pale, grayish cast to it, like all the life had drained out of it. She was wearing a plain, faded dress, stained with dirt, and her hair, what looked like thin silver hair, hung in muddy, tangled clumps around her face. I remember noticing her feet because at first I thought she had shoes caked in mud, but then I realized they were bare. Just filthy, dark with muck and leaves stuck to them. I remember trying to speak to her. I asked if she was okay, if she needed help, but she didn't answer. She just kept coming, staring straight at me with this empty, fixed look. No expression, no sign she even really heard me. And when she got close enough that I felt I needed to move, I stood up and started backing away, slow at first, because I didn't want to turn my back on her. Then the dream changed. It was night all of a sudden. Not a gradual shift, just instant darkness. And she was only a few feet away from me now, but that didn't make it less terrifying. Her mouth opened wide, wider than it should have, like she was screaming at me, except there was no sound at all. Not a single sound. She reached toward me, and I saw that her fingers looked twisted, almost root-like too. And I can't fully explain this part, but the feeling that hit me in that moment was pure dread. Not just fear, dread. Like every part of me knew that if she touched me, something terrible would happen. Right before her hand reached my arm, I forced myself awake. I sat up in my tent sometime between 1 and 1:30 in the morning, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might shake the whole tent. I was absolutely frozen. I didn't want to move. I didn't even want to breathe too loudly. I just listened, and all I could hear were normal nighttime sounds. Crickets, the soft water against the shoreline. Once in a while, something small moving through the leaves. Nothing strange, nothing dramatic, but I was still terrified. I had to deliberately slow my breathing and talk myself down in my own head before I could even begin to calm down. It took a long time before I could fall back asleep. At least an hour, maybe more. The rest of the night passed without anything else that I remember. When I woke up the next morning, I felt uneasy in a way I couldn't really shake, but I was rested enough to get back on the bike and keep going. I just ended up taking a few extra breaks that day because the whole thing stayed with me. And honestly, even now, I still go back and forth on it. Maybe it was just a vivid nightmare brought on by the unfamiliar place, the long ride, and sleeping down near the lake. That would be the logical explanation. But it didn't feel like an ordinary dream. It felt unusually real, like I had stepped into something instead of imagined it. So I don't know. Maybe it was nothing more than a bad dream, but I've never quite been able to convince myself of that. You know, this happened more than 20 years ago, back when I was studying electronics. In those days, I never went anywhere without music. This was long before streaming, of course, so my soundtrack came through a cassette Walkman. Mine was a slim, old Sony model with a key lock switch on the side, and that little detail matters more than you'd think. Every day I followed the same route to school. Part of it meant crossing a wide, busy boulevard just before I arrived. And like a lot of young people, I thought I was invincible. Instead of using the pedestrian crossing, I'd usually cut across the road a good 40 or 50 meters before it. Looking back, it was such a reckless thing to do. That day was completely ordinary at first. I'd eaten at home, put on my headphones, pressed play, and headed out like always. I reached the usual spot where I crossed the boulevard, and without really thinking, I stepped forward. And then, right at that exact moment, the music stopped. Not faded out, not crackled. It just stopped. So I stopped too, with one foot hanging just a few centimeters from the street. If the music hadn't cut out, my next step would have taken me straight into the road. At that same instant, a city bus tore past in front of me at full speed. When I say it brushed past me, I mean it. It was so close I could see my own reflection in the windows as it flew by. I can still picture it now. Everything felt like it slowed down for a second. The music cuts out. I freeze. The bus flashes past my face. It all happened in less than a heartbeat, but it felt endless. I remember thinking, my God, I nearly got myself killed. Then the shock hit me all at once. I started shaking. I was furious at myself. I hadn't even looked before stepping out. I just stood there trembling, feeling sick, completely rattled, with my Walkman suddenly silent in my hands. I moved under a nearby bridge to catch my breath and calm down. My first thought was that the batteries must have died at the perfect moment. That had to be it, right? So I pulled the Walkman out from inside my jacket and tried turning it back on. Nothing. Then I noticed the hold switch was still on. That meant I hadn't accidentally pressed anything. The controls had been locked the whole time. I switched the lock off, pressed play again, and the machine came right back to life. The battery indicator showed they were still full. I just stared at it. I was already shaken, but that's when I felt truly stunned. The Walkman had shut off for no reason I could understand, at the exact second it needed to. And because it did, I stopped before stepping into the road. Call it luck, a glitch, fate, divine intervention. I honestly don't know. But whatever it was, it saved me that day. One more step, just one, and that bus would have hit me. What stayed with me most was that glimpse of my own face in those windows, so close it was like looking into a mirror. I've never forgotten it. So, I want to tell you about a house in Corinth, New York, that I ended up investigating more than once. Part of the reason was simple. We got more strange, unexplainable activity there than almost anywhere else. But the bigger reason was the woman who lived there. She was deeply worried about her teenage daughter, who had gone through this sudden, unsettling shift in behavior. Mood swings, depression, things that just didn't feel like her. The house had belonged to their family for generations, and they knew for sure that at least 2 people had died there. There was also this old family rumor that, years and years before, someone had done some kind of ritual or witchcraft in the attic. But the moment that has stayed with me all this time happened in the kitchen. My team and I were sitting there with the homeowner, running an EVP session. Honestly, at first, it felt pretty quiet. Nothing especially intense. We were just about ready to call it and move on when, all of a sudden, the space under the kitchen table turned ice cold. Not a little colder, drastically colder. It felt like the temperature had dropped 20 degrees in an instant. I had a handheld thermometer with me, so I leaned down and checked the air beneath the table, then compared it to the air above it. The difference was real. Sharp. Immediate. Now, this woman's mother had passed away in that home. More than that, she had died right there in that same kitchen. And in that moment, I got this strong feeling that maybe her mother was with us. So I looked at the woman and gently said, "I think your mom might be here. Is there anything you want to ask her? Anything you want to say?" She started speaking to her mother. I don't remember every word she said, and honestly, most of it isn't what matters. What I do remember is this. She stopped in the middle of talking, looked upward for a second, and then, in this soft, almost fragile voice, said, "Do you remember that little squirrel we used to feed every morning? Do you remember what we used to call him?" A week or so later, I was reviewing the audio. When I got to that part, I noticed a fluctuation in the waveform right after she asked the question. So I put on headphones, turned the volume way up, and listened carefully. At first, I wasn't sure. I replayed it again, then again. And what I kept hearing, clearer each time, was the word nibbles. I went back to the house a few days later to go over everything we had captured. There were a few other odd bits of evidence, but nothing that came close to this. When we got to that clip, I wrote the word nibbles on a piece of paper and kept it hidden. Then I played the audio for her and asked, "Tell me what you hear." The moment the clip ended, she started crying. Before she could even answer, I put the paper in front of her. She looked down at it, and she just broke. Through tears, she told me that Nibbles was the nickname her mother had made up for that squirrel. Nobody else would have known it. Nobody. And in that kitchen, on that day, it really felt like we had reached her mother. Even now, telling you this, I get chills. It was close to 20 years ago, and I still haven't forgotten it. Some moments just stay with you, and that one absolutely did. I've had this happen to me a couple of times in my life, and even now, saying it out loud feels strange. These weren't ordinary dreams. They happened when I was in that half-asleep, half-aware state, sometimes lucid, where I knew I was dreaming and could usually guide what was happening. But these moments were different. They came in suddenly, took over completely, and felt more real than anything I'd ever experienced in sleep. What makes them so hard to dismiss is that both times, they seem to line up with real-world events. Big events. The kind you can actually verify. And both times, the experience shocked me awake, and I checked the time right away because I knew something about it was deeply off. I should say this too. When people go through something they truly believe is paranormal, they usually don't rush to tell everyone. At least, I didn't. The first time this happened, it involved a major national tragedy, and I kept it to myself for years. I didn't want to sound like I was trying to make someone else's suffering into my story. I still don't. But it happened, and I've never been able to fully explain it away. Back in 2001, I was in graduate school. I had a late morning class that day, so I was still asleep when it happened. I was having one of those calm, lucid dreams where everything felt light and easy, and I was fully in control. Then all at once, it changed. No transition, no warning. It was like being yanked into someone else's final moments. The whole thing only lasted a few seconds, but the fear in it was overwhelming. I can still remember the sensation more than the visuals. It felt like moving impossibly fast, faster than my mind could process. I had this vague sense of seeing through someone else's eyes, but what really came through was their terror. Pure terror. It was the absolute certainty that death was only seconds away. I woke up violently, almost falling out of bed, heart pounding so hard it hurt. I looked at the clock immediately. It was 8:47 a.m. Eastern Time. At first, I didn't connect it to anything. I just got up and went on with my morning. But later, when people began describing what those final moments on one of the planes might have felt like, something inside me turned cold. The speed, the city rushing by, the helplessness. It matched the feeling of that dream in a way I couldn't ignore. For years after that, I replayed it in my mind. I questioned myself constantly. I wondered if I had imagined the connection after the fact, and because nothing like it happened again for such a long time, I started to doubt my own memory. Then, not too long ago, it happened a second time. This one came out of nowhere. I wasn't even in a vivid dream, not that I remember. It was more like another scene suddenly cut in, sharp and immediate. I found myself looking out over a bright open square, somewhere warm and sunlit, with a fountain or shallow pool nearby. It should have been peaceful, but it wasn't. The ground was shaking beneath me, and I could feel that unmistakable rolling vertigo of an earthquake. Again, I wasn't exactly myself. It felt like I was inside someone else's perspective, feeling their fear as if it were my own. But this time, unlike the first experience, the person didn't die. The moment stretched on. The panic slowly faded into frustration, then irritation, like, please, just let this stop already. That emotional shift was so oddly specific that it stayed with me. The next day, after getting distracted by an argument with my roommate, I was scrolling through the news and saw the top story: a cluster of earthquakes in Istanbul. It had happened in broad daylight there. I did the time conversion, and the moment I had checked in my room lined up almost exactly with the timing of the first quake. That was the second time I felt like I had somehow stepped into someone else's experience from very far away, while in that receptive state between sleeping and waking. So now I'm left wondering whether anyone else has ever experienced something like this. Have you ever been half asleep or lucid dreaming and suddenly found yourself seeing through the eyes of someone far away, especially someone in fear? Not just seeing it, but feeling their emotions as if they were your own? You know, I was probably around 9 years old when this happened, maybe 10. It was sometime in the late 80s, back when summers felt endless and heavy, and nights in our old house could feel like they were holding their breath. I'm in my late 40s now, and I still haven't fully made peace with what I saw that night. I grew up in a little town in Ohio, and we lived in this really old house right near the edge of town. It had been a lot of things before it became a home. People used to say it had once been a workshop, then a stable, and later some kind of tavern before somebody turned it into a residence. And honestly, the place always felt like it remembered every version of itself. Anyway, it was early summer, one of those nights where the heat just sticks to your skin. We didn't have air conditioning, so the windows were cracked open, hoping for even the smallest breeze, but there was nothing. I remember falling asleep feeling hot and uncomfortable. Then, sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up all at once. It wasn't because of a sound. Nobody called my name. Nothing moved. I just suddenly felt aware, like something wanted me awake. I opened my eyes and sat straight up in bed. The first thing I noticed was that the room felt cool. Not just a little cooler, I mean noticeably cold compared to when I'd gone to sleep. That alone felt wrong. And then, I heard a voice. Not out loud. Not with my ears exactly. It was inside my head, clear as anything. I'm here. I shared the room with my older sister, Mara, so of course the first thing I did was look over at her bed. She was completely asleep, didn't stir at all. And then I got this strange feeling, almost like a nudge in my mind telling me, no, keep looking. So I did. My eyes moved slowly down toward the foot of her bed, then past it, toward the dark corner near the closet. And that's when I saw them. 2 red eyes, glowing, just fixed on me from the shadows. I went completely still. And the weird part is, for a second, I wasn't even afraid. I think my brain was trying to make it make sense. I thought maybe it was our dog, Rusty. Maybe he'd wandered into the room, and the light from outside was catching his eyes. Then that voice came again, calm as ever. Look at your sister's bed. So I looked back, and there was Rusty, curled up right at the foot of her bed. That was the moment everything inside me dropped. Because if the dog was there, then whatever was standing by the closet was not him. I yanked the covers over myself so fast, like a blanket could protect me from something I didn't understand. I stayed there, barely breathing, listening. But there was nothing. No footsteps, no growl, no movement at all. Just silence. Thick, unnatural silence. Our parents' room connected to ours through this old doorway because the house had been remodeled so many times over the years. I remember calling for my dad. Once. Then again. Then louder. It felt like my voice was moving through syrup, like time had slowed down in the room. Finally, I heard my mother answer me. But before she came in, I heard something else. A laugh. Soft. Quiet. Definitely not hers. Then the voice said, "Look outside." I don't even know why I listened, but I did. I turned toward the window, and I watched the light from our neighbor's garage go out. Then another house went dark. Then another. One by one, all down the street, the whole town seemed to lose power in this slow, eerie chain. A second later, my mom came into the room and tried the light switch. Click. Nothing. She tried it again. Still nothing. I told her I thought something had been in the room. She barely looked around. She just told me it was a bad dream, that the power must have gone out, and that I needed to calm down. I looked back toward the closet. Whatever had been there was gone. She told me to lie back down and try to sleep, and eventually I did, at least physically. But I never truly rested after that night. Even now, all these years later, I cannot sleep with a closet door open. Not ever. I don't care how silly it sounds. Something was in that room with me. I can't prove it, and I can't explain it, but I know what I felt. I know what I saw. And more than anything, I know it wanted me to know it was there. I've got to tell you about something that happened to me a few years ago that I still can't fully explain. My band and I were driving through Northern California, and on one of our off days, we ended up in San Jose. Somebody suggested we check out the Winchester Mystery House, and honestly, I didn't know a thing about it. To me, it just sounded like one of those famous roadside attractions people visit because they feel like they're supposed to. Before the tour started, we hung around the lobby for a bit. I bought a bottle of water and sat down beneath this portrait of Sarah Winchester. Nothing felt strange at first. It all seemed pretty ordinary. Then I accidentally spilled some water on the table, and in the back of my mind I heard this thought so clearly. Clean it up. Respect the lady of the house. I brushed it off. I figured it was just my conscience talking. But once the tour began, things shifted. Right near the start, there was this man in a red short-sleeved shirt talking to an older couple. Out of nowhere, he turned, looked right at me, and said, "Spirits can move through time." Then he just turned back around like nothing had happened. That got my attention. Our guide came in a moment later, and there was something about her energy I couldn't settle with. Not evil exactly, just odd, uncomfortable. Like she knew more than she was letting on. For a while, the tour was just a tour. Strange house, strange history, stained glass, stories about Sarah Winchester and her obsession with patterns and numbers. Then we stepped into Sarah's bedroom, and I don't know how else to say it except that I was suddenly overwhelmed. I started tearing up out of nowhere, and standing beside me was that same man in red. Only later did I learn his name was Will. The older woman from earlier was there too, along with her husband. And here's what made it feel so strange. Throughout the whole tour, people kept drifting around, splitting off from the groups they came in with. But somehow, no matter where I ended up, Will kept appearing near me. In that bedroom, as I was trying not to completely lose it, I thought about my grandmother. She died when I was 13, and I never got to say goodbye to her. The second that memory hit me, that older woman turned toward me with tears in her eyes and gave me this soft, knowing smile. She had an oxygen tube and a little bag at her side, and for one impossible moment, I felt like my grandmother was somehow there with me. Not in a dramatic horror movie way, in a quiet, aching, deeply personal way. Like love had found a crack in time and slipped through. I know how that sounds. I do. But that's what it felt like. Later, we stopped in a room overlooking the garden, and in my head, I started speaking silently to her. I was thinking, I miss you. Look at the man I became. This is my band. This is my life. The whole time she kept looking at me with tears in her eyes, smiling gently. And then the second I stopped, her expression went blank. Just like that, she was a stranger again. Not long after, I heard Will again, but not out loud. That's the part that still bends my mind. It was like hearing words inside my head that weren't mine. Clear as intuition, but sharper, more deliberate. What I heard was something like, "Yes, this is happening, and don't let the tour guide know you can hear me." From then on, I was rattled. A little later, we did that awkward thing, where two people both gesture for the other to go first. I finally stepped ahead, and behind me, out loud this time, he said, "Thanks for the dance." I answered, "You're welcome. It was lovely." And then he disappeared back into the crowd. By then, I was barely holding it together. I was trying to act normal, but inside I was spiraling. I kept asking myself, am I imagining all this? Am I losing it? Then it got stranger. Near a library area, I was standing beside a young woman with glasses when I heard another voice in my head, not mine again, saying something like, "Protect her." A little later I thought, what is happening to me? And a blonde woman behind me laughed out loud at the exact moment I thought it. I answered her silently in my head, "Don't laugh. This is new to me." And she laughed again, like she'd heard me. There was also this moment by the famous door to nowhere. I looked through a pane of glass and caught my reflection, but only half my face was lit. The other half was swallowed in shadow. Standing behind me in the reflection was the older woman's husband. He looked at me with this hard expression and said, out loud, "I hope it was worth it," then walked off. I had no clue what that meant. Then came the part that really shook me. There was a stairway leading one way and a narrow staff passage leading another. The guide specifically told everyone not to use the staff passage. Almost everyone ignored her and went through it anyway. I didn't. I started up the stairs instead. When I looked back, Will was behind me, and now he was holding hands with the blonde woman who'd laughed earlier. We entered another room, and a little blonde boy had just stepped away from a mirror over the mantel. In the reflection, I saw Will and the woman staring back at me, both slowly shaking their heads. Then I heard this disembodied message in my mind. "If you have children, he'll take them from you." That one hit me like ice water. I still don't know what to make of it. Then we reached the kitchen, and that's where the guide suddenly focused on me. She mentioned water heaters, twice, and that stopped me cold, because at the time I worked as a water heater technician. Then she told the group, almost playfully, that she had a friend who liked bringing certain people to the house so they could play a kind of game, a test involving the history of the house. She said she usually won. Most of the group looked confused. I didn't. By the end of the tour, we all gathered in the last room, and the arrangement of people felt strangely ceremonial, almost like everyone had taken their places without being told. The guide said something about Star Wars, and that caught me because I've been thinking about Star Wars imagery all through the tour. Light and dark, tests, spirits, all of it. Then I looked around and realized several people near me were wearing Star Wars shirts or dark clothing, including one of my bandmates. I can't explain why that mattered. It just did, in the moment. It felt like symbolism was happening all around me, and I was the only one reading it. When the tour ended, I hurried into the gift shop, trying to find Will. I spotted him heading toward the exit, and I followed him outside. He was standing near the garden fence, and the blonde woman was walking toward a silver minivan. She called out, "Come on, Will, make it quick." I walked up to him and shook his hand. I asked him as honestly as I could, "I felt something in there. What was that? Can you tell me anything else?" He looked at me with this little half smile and said, "Enjoy the basement." Then he got into the van and drove away. And as it pulled off, I realized everyone from that strange final room formation, except the guide, was in that vehicle with him. Family, maybe. Or something else. I still don't know. I went back inside to rejoin my band, and they were all just sitting there, casually waiting for the next tour, like nothing had happened. I was still stunned, still trying to process it, and when the second tour started, our guide was the same woman from before. Only now she seemed lighter, almost smug, like some private little contest had ended in her favor. That whole day has stayed with me. I still remember it clearly. Every room, every look, every word. I think it happened in 2019, maybe 2020. I've only told a couple of people because I know how unbelievable it sounds. But I'm telling you exactly how I lived it. Maybe it was intuition, maybe grief, maybe suggestion, maybe something spiritual. I honestly don't know. What I do know is that I walked into that house as a bored tourist, and I walked out feeling like reality was bigger, stranger, and far more alive than I'd ever allowed myself to believe. I want to tell you about something that happened to me last year, because honestly, I still haven't been able to make sense of it. At the time, there were 4 of us living in the house. Me, my older brother, my cousin Mara, and my aunt. Mara and I shared a bedroom upstairs, so I was used to knowing whether she was there or not. One night, sometime around 2:30, maybe closer to 3 in the morning, I woke up needing to use the bathroom downstairs. The room was dark, and when I looked over at Mara's bed, she wasn't in it. That didn't really alarm me right away, because sometimes she'd fall asleep on the couch in the living room. So I got up, grabbed my phone, and used the screen light to guide myself down the stairs. I was trying to be quiet at first because I didn't want to wake her if she was sleeping downstairs. But when I reached the living room, she wasn't there. That's when I stopped and really started to feel confused. I remember just standing there for a second, thinking, okay, if she's not upstairs and she's not here, then where is she? I started turning on lights and checking everywhere. I looked through every part of the house I could think of. The kitchen, the hallway, the bathroom, every corner I could check. Nothing. No sign of her at all. Then my thoughts started racing. I even wondered if maybe she'd gone outside, but that didn't make sense either. Our neighborhood isn't the kind of place where you just wander out in the middle of the night. So I started knocking on doors. My brother's room was locked. My aunt's room was locked. I called their names over and over, louder and louder. And that's the part that really unsettles me. None of them answered. I wasn't being quiet anymore. I was making enough noise that at least one person should have yelled at me to stop. None of them are especially heavy sleepers, and I know for a fact I was loud. But I got nothing back. No footsteps, no voices, no annoyed, "What are you doing?" Just silence. I kept at it for what felt like forever, probably close to an hour. At some point, I think I stopped looking for Mara and just started making noise because I wanted proof that someone could hear me. I wanted any kind of response. But nothing came. Eventually, I gave up. I went back upstairs, got into bed, and somehow managed to fall asleep. The next morning, everything was completely normal. Everyone was home. Mara was in the kitchen helping make breakfast like it was any other day. So I asked her where she'd gone the night before, and she looked at me like I was the weird one. She said she hadn't gone anywhere, that she'd been asleep downstairs on the couch. I told everyone what had happened, how I'd searched the whole house, how I'd called out for them, how nobody answered me. And they all just kind of brushed it off. They said maybe I hadn't looked carefully enough. Maybe I was half asleep. Maybe I imagined parts of it. And for a while, I tried to accept that. I told myself maybe they were right. Maybe I was groggy and panicked and not thinking clearly. Even though deep down, that explanation never really sat right with me. Then something happened again. Not to me this time, to my mom. And it brought the whole thing back. She searched the whole gym and couldn't find a single person. So she stepped back outside and asked someone passing by where the kids were playing badminton. And the person pointed right at the gym and said, "Inside." My mom went back in, and suddenly the place was full. Kids, noise, activity, everything exactly where it should have been, like it had been that way the whole time. When she told me that, I got chills, because it felt way too close to what happened to me that night. That same feeling of being somewhere familiar, searching, and somehow not finding what should have been right in front of you. I still don't know what to call it. I don't know if it was stress, exhaustion, some kind of strange mental lapse, or something I can't explain. But whatever it was, it didn't feel normal. And the fact that something so similar happened to my mom makes it even harder to shrug off. So yeah, I still think about that night. And I still can't decide what scares me more, if it was real or if it wasn't. I still think about this sometimes, even now. It's been about 20 years, and for some reason, that memory never really left me. I was probably around 11, maybe 12 when it happened. We were living in the Philippines then, and summer had this very particular feeling to it. Everything moved slowly. The afternoons felt endless. The sunlight came in thick and golden through the wooden windows, and you'd hear mangoes dropping onto the roof outside like little warning knocks from nowhere. My older brother Marco and I shared a bedroom on the second floor. The room had this wooden divider in the middle, but during the hotter months, we'd take it down and slide both doors open to let the air move through. We always hoped for that cool breeze from the north. That was the one that made sleeping easier. It would come in through those silver-framed windows and soften the heat a little. Our room faced north and west. On the north side, there were mango trees standing close to the house, maybe 10 feet away, just beyond the kitchen roof below. On the west side, you could see the neighboring houses, low and quiet, especially at sunset when everything turned orange and gray. One night, the divider was down, the doors were open, and the air was completely still. No breeze at all. My brother had already fallen asleep on the bed to the left side of the room, and I was lying awake on the other side, just staring at the ceiling. I remember hearing insects outside, the wood settling now and then, and that kind of silence that feels deeper at night. And then, for no reason I could explain, I woke up. Not because of a loud sound, not because somebody called my name. It was just that strange kind of waking, where your eyes open and you immediately feel like something is wrong, even though everything around you is quiet. So I stayed still for a moment, listening. Nothing. No voices, no barking dogs, no movement from outside. I tried to go back to sleep. I kept staring into the dark, waiting for my eyes to adjust. And that's when I saw them. 2 small red dots outside the northern window. They weren't moving. They were perfectly still, evenly spaced, just suspended there in the darkness like a pair of eyes looking in. I can still remember the way my whole body went cold. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I just lay there pretending I hadn't seen anything, because somehow that felt safer. I closed my eyes and tried to force myself back to sleep, but of course I couldn't. I stayed awake for what felt like hours, just waiting for the sky to lighten. When morning finally came and the room started to fill with that pale, early light, I looked again. They were gone. At breakfast, I told my parents what I'd seen. My mom listened, smiling in that calm way she had, and told me it was probably just a reflection from the control switches in their room. There were little red indicator lights on them, and she said maybe with the divider gone and the room opened up, I was seeing those lights reflected in our window from a strange angle. Honestly, it sounded reasonable. Their room was directly across from ours, and the explanation made enough sense that I accepted it. That same week, we went to stay with my grandparents for a few days, which was something we often did. I spent the whole time playing with my cousins, running around outside, getting dusty, staying busy. And little by little, I forgot about the red eyes. Until we came back home. The very first night we were back, it happened again. I woke up the same way. No noise, no reason, just that sudden awareness. And immediately, I remembered what I had seen before. This time, I told myself not to be scared. I told myself it was only the reflection. I even turned my body slowly, pretending I was just shifting in my sleep, and looked toward the window with barely open eyes. 2 red dots. Still, evenly spaced, watching. That scared me enough that I finally got out of bed and went to ask my mother for a glass of warm milk. She got up without complaining, like she always did, and came downstairs with me. While I was drinking, I asked her if she could please turn off the lights on the panel because the reflection was frightening me. She took me back upstairs and showed me the switches in their room. 2 little red lights were glowing. She pointed at one and said, "This one's your father's phone." Then she pointed at the other and said, "And this one's mine." She switched them both off, and the red lights disappeared. Then she told me, very softly, "Go check now." So I looked toward our window, and the red eyes were gone. She kissed my forehead after that, and told me I just had a vivid imagination. She said that kind of imagination would someday become something beautiful. And for a while, I believed her. I really did. After that, a few weeks passed, and I stopped thinking about it. I slept normally again. Whatever fear I had felt started to fade, because in my mind, I had already solved the mystery. Then one night, it happened again. The same sudden waking, the same silence, the same feeling of dread before I even opened my eyes fully. I turned my head toward the northern window, and there they were. The red eyes had come back. But this time, I didn't panic right away. I was older now by a few weeks, braver in that way kids can be when they think they understand something. I turned to look toward my parents' room, expecting to see the little red panel lights glowing again. But when I looked, every single light was off. I work overnights, so most mornings I'm walking home just before sunrise, when everything feels half asleep and a little unreal. A few nights ago, I caught something moving out of the corner of my eye, cutting across the road fast. At first I told myself it was probably a deer. I live in a tiny Midwestern town, and at that hour, you get used to seeing all kinds of wildlife out and about. So I tried not to think too much of it. I'm a single mom, and my little boy, Mason, is 6. On weekends, my mom keeps him for me sometimes so I can catch up on sleep and pick up extra shifts. That night, I was just focused on getting home like always. But after a while, I started hearing this strange shuffling sound behind me. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I took my earbuds out right away. There's a hotel near the road I walk, and with all the road work happening lately, there have been a lot of out-of-town workers staying there. Maybe that sounds judgmental, but when you're walking home alone in the dark, you don't take chances. I looked around, listening hard, but there was nobody there. No footsteps, no voices, nothing. After a minute, everything went quiet again except for the crickets and frogs, and I told myself I was just being paranoid. But then I turned onto my road, and that's when I heard it. It was this distant sound that almost reminded me of a scream, but not quite. It happened every few seconds, the exact same way, from what sounded like the exact same spot every time. At first I thought maybe it was an animal, like a rabbit caught by a fox or something. That happens around here. But this was too steady, too repeated. Real animals don't sound that precise. I can't explain it any better than that. It just felt wrong. I didn't run. I didn't speed up. I'd heard enough stories growing up to know that if something feels off out there, you don't call attention to yourself. So I just kept walking at the same pace, acting like I didn't hear a thing, even though every instinct in me was screaming to get home. Ever since then, I've been terrified to make that walk. But I don't really have another option. I still work nights, and I still have to get home somehow. Every time I pass those trees now, I feel like something is watching me. And here's why I think whatever it is didn't stay outside. A few mornings later, my mom had Mason with her again so I could rest after work. I got home around 5, sat down in the living room, and turned on the TV to unwind. I had only been there a few minutes when I heard, clear as day, "Mama," coming from my son's bedroom. It was Mason's voice. I froze, but I didn't answer. I knew he wasn't there. I knew he was with my mom. A little later, I heard it again. "Mama." Same voice, same room. I still didn't react. I just sat there and tried to act normal, even though I could feel my chest pounding. Since then, it's happened more than once. Sometimes I'll hear Mason's voice from another room, even when he's sitting right there with me in the living room. The strangest part is that he never reacts. Not once. It's like he doesn't hear it at all. Like I'm the only one it's talking to. Then there's the knocking. No one on the porch. No one by the road. Nothing. I don't know what this is. I don't know why it sounds like my child. And I don't know what I'm supposed to do when something outside starts sounding like it already knows its way inside my home.